Good evening. We're about to get started, and right now we're into our special session, and I am going to ask our clerk to call roll.
Davenport. Here. Blink. Taylor. Here. Wright. Present. Fisher. Buell.
Here.
Culpepper.
Here.
Myers. Here. Canby. We have a quorum.
Thank you. As we move into our work session, may I have a motion to suspend the rules?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Those opposed? Thank you. Before us, we have two agenda items for, excuse me, Manager Williams, are we expecting the attorney?
Yes, I was just communicating with him. I think he was under the impression it was at 6 o'clock, like our typical, the attorney didn't normally come to our work session, so he's on his way right now.
Okay.
So I think there's two items. Do they both have ordinances?
Only the second item has an ordinance, so we could probably proceed with the first if choose.
Okay, we'll just go with the first. We're going to go with number one. Commissioners, you have this to extend the time, I believe it's for the appointment of our judge for municipal court. Has everybody read the, I'm reading it myself now. For Judge Ryan Hope's appointment to the state court. Is there a motion on the floor to extend the time?
Maybe you should read the whole thing.
And I can explain a little bit, and I know Judd can do even better. Initially, as y'all know, Judge Hope was appointed by the state to state court, and y'all subsequently accepted his resignation, but at the same time appointed him as interim municipal court judge until, and just for the benefit of the public, Commissioner Wright, the municipal court judge serves at the pleasure of the commission, and so it is the only judgeship that does that, and so the commission went ahead and, as he officially resigned his position to take over state court duties, but, gives enough to this organization that he was willing to continue the interim municipal court judge. And at the time, there was a date certain that was put at the end of it, which we're approaching, which I think is later this week. And there are, I'm told, hundreds of cases next week that would be put on delay if this action's not taken. And so in agreement with Judge Hope and the attorneys, Attorney Hines drafted a resolution that is before you tonight to go ahead and extend the appointment of Judge Hope so that municipal court operations can continue until such time that y'all find a replacement.
Are there any questions from any of the commissioners? We did have a motion from Commissioner Myers. Was there a second?
A second.
Second from Commissioner Davenport. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The resolution has passed unanimously.
And before we get too far from it, I failed to mention, but it is in the resolution. I think this also extends the Interim Administrative Hearing Officer as well. So there's really two birds, one stone.
And that does happen automatically with the hearing officer?
With your
Okay.
vote.
Okay. Well, I
can explain the second one while Judd gets here. But basically, you approved, everything's procedurally fine. I know there were some questions about that in the media with the economic development project that y'all approved at the last meeting. To Judd's credit, he went back, watched everything, read everything, and if anything needed to be made sure that we did it the correct way, it was the approval of the budget ordinance, which helped to transfer funds in the budget, allocate them, but they're already there, but they needed to be put in a certain place, and it's about $93,000 to round out the package that has been agreed upon to help entice the industry to come here to Athens. And so just as to be safe and have y'all ratify that so the budget ordinance was appropriately adopted, Judd, you'd ask that we put this back on the agenda.
Yes. I apologize. I was at a board relations meeting. I thought y'all started at 6. So sorry.
No, and you don't, and I explained, you don't typically come to the work session, so.
Oh, well, no, but I knew about this meeting. I thought it was at 6, though, and I was at the board. I apologize. I
So-
ran over here.
I can tell. We want you to kind of calm down.
Well, while he's catching his breath,
Yeah, take it. We're good. We're not going nowhere.
Judd, they've already acted on the interim
All right, good.
extension, and they were just about to consider a vote on the
So I'll
budget
read the
ordinance.
ordinance. An ordinance to amend the FY 2023 annual operating capital budget for Athens-Clarke County, Georgia, so as to provide funding for the economic development site, infrastructure improvements, and for other purposes.
So move.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been motioned by Commissioner Hamby, seconded by Commissioner Link. All in favor? Aye. Those opposed? Ayes have it. At this point, I think we've covered the 2 items. May I call for a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So move.
A motion by Commissioner Hamby, seconded by Commissioner Myers. All in favor?
Aye.
So moved. And with that, we are adjourned. And we're going to turn it over to our work session.
Now
And
Judge can leave.
and now, Judge, you can leave.
Well, I might be here for one item on the work session agenda, the first item.
And so as you're coming to sit, Mayor Pro Tem, and we'll pull the screen down and everything, I wanted to give an introduction on some of our topics tonight. A lot of really weighty topics for y'all to consider. And we're going to begin with the Pittard Road and Dunlap Road environmental studies. And first, we've got a presenter who's actually in the air on an airplane. So Mike Wharton's calling in. I don't know how, but he's on the OWL. And then we also have Rebecca Davis and Suki Jansen, who've also helped to work on this extensively. And I know Mike will go through a summary, but if you'll remember, in 2 successive budget years, you put some funds aside to do some analysis of these 2 sites, which long-standing concerns about environmental impacts, environmental justice due to the proximity to certain neighborhoods. And so what staff has done, there may have been some expectation to do more, but we wanted to do a review of the literature, pull everything together in one place, see what the issues were, present to y'all, and as you know, there are some public hearings in the affected neighborhoods where we're going to present all this information to the residents and hear their concerns. And we would just say at that point, then we decide what the next steps are, unless y'all have a different idea in the interim. So with that, there is no pending agenda item behind this work session. It's just informational. We'll go to the public, and then we'll revisit the topic. So we have Mike on the phone?
We're getting there. It's a little more complicated than our normal setup. So bear with us for just a second.
Well, and then while Jeff does that, the benefits and wellness strategy, compensation strategy, for our newer commissioners, this is an annual presentation that is done in tandem with the budget development process. It's for your information. You've got the upcoming budget hearings during the month of May. As you know, the mayor is finalizing his draft budget, and I think he's reached out to y'all for any input that you have. And so in the manager's draft, Big Rocks, the recommendations that are in there, you'll hear more about the details, and feel free, obviously, to ask questions of both our staff and our consultants. And then finally tonight, we've got Dr. Remy Epps with us, who has been working with the HRC, the Human Relations Commission, along with Nikki Jones, and they have a work plan that she's going to present that they have agreed upon going forward. So those are the items that we have for you tonight. And I'm looking up there, I'm always forgetting folks. Josh Edwards, Joseph D'Angelo, Suki Jansen, Mike Wharton, and then with the attorney's office's recommendation, Rebecca Davis, who's an environmental attorney, is the group that's done most of the work with this.
Good evening. I'm Rebecca Davis. I'm a law partner at Seyfarth Shaw, and wanted to check and see if, Mike, can you hear me okay?
I can, thank you.
All right. So tonight, we're going to be focusing on two different reports, and I'm going to turn over the introduction to Pittard Road to Mike. Mike, can you hear me okay? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
So good evening and thank you.
Hey, Mike, hold on one second.
If I have too much feedback.
Hold on. Commissioner Davenport has a question.
Hey, Dr. Davis, can you give us a brief overview of who you are?
Yes, I'm sorry about that. I didn't want to jump into that before I started speaking later on because I was afraid we were going to lose Mike. But so I apologize. But my name is Rebecca Davis. I am a partner at the law firm of Seyfarth Shaw. I am an environmental partner. I do litigation, real estate transaction, economic development, ESG, and environmental due diligence, cleanup, and remediation. And over the past almost year, I've been looking into various matters with respect to Pittard Road and Dunlap Road to basically review existing data and make some preliminary findings and conclusions with respect to both locations. With respect to background, I am a UGA graduate. I graduated with an environmental science degree way too long ago, and also have a master's degree in microbiology with an emphasis on hazardous waste management, and my law degree is from Georgia State University. Thank you.
Okay, Mike, go ahead and proceed, please.
All right, if we can go to the second slide. So tonight we're going to bring you some information concerning Pittard and Dunlap Road that we've been working on for a couple of years. We'll go through the project authorization, determining the area of interest, research and investigation, and some of our findings and recommendations. Next slide, please. So this came up first in July 2020 resolution when it was initially looked at. That has been followed by funding in 2021. And because there were some specific differences, we can go to the next slide, please, between Pittard Road and Dunlap Road. Pittard is primarily in private ownership. Dunlap is primarily public property. And because of those differences, we're going to bring those in two different sub-projects. We can go to the next slide, please. So the first thing we wound up doing is meeting with Commissioner Thornton and some area residents. Since we're going to start with Pittard Road. We reviewed the historic aerial maps. We looked at hydrology and topography. And we established our best guess for the area of interest. We go to the next slide, please. So this is the area of interest from about the same view I have, about 30,000 feet. You can see Pittard Road to the north. The middle school is there to the east. And then there's the CSX main line. If we could go to the next slide, please. The next slide is a little bit closer up. What we have is the former DuPont plant in the southwest. There's also that lake that you see next to it is DuPont Lake. And you can see the CSX main line as well. So that gives you a little bit of perspective on where we're talking about. If we can go to the next slides, please. At this point, I want to turn it over to Rebecca so she can talk about the various steps and all the things we did to investigate and find out what we could about this area.
All right, great. Thank you so much. And I feel a great deal of relief. I really was afraid we'd lose you at some point. As I noted earlier, my name is Rebecca Davis, and I am a environmental law partner at Seyfarth Shaw. And For the better part of the last year, we have been looking into various records and conducting research into the historical background and potential exposure pathways with respect to Pittard Road. The slide basically represents a number of the areas that we looked at over the past year. One of the first things that we did was submit an Open Records Act request to state organizations, including the Georgia EPD. And we also submitted a FOIA request to federal agencies, including the EPA and Department of Justice. We also reviewed legal actions through the federal online database called PACER. And we did identify, with the help of information provided in response to our FOIA request from the Department of Justice, a DOJ complaint and a consent decree from 2006. We reviewed that complaint and we reviewed the consent decree, and it related to permitting type violations and administrative violations with respect to a former owner, DuPont then Investa, and it did not implicate, fortunately, any properties in Athens, Georgia. But also, notably with respect to that DOJ complaint and consent decree, it did relate to administrative violations and did not include any concerns with releases or anything of that nature. We also obtained and reviewed a Georgia Public Cancer Cluster Investigation report from 2006. That report included details of sampling of wells in the area. It also included an analysis, an epidemiological analysis of cancer clusters in the area. Specifically, breast cancer was a concern, and that report concluded that there was no actual cancer cluster or increased risk of incidents within the area. We also obtained and reviewed an environmental assessment, a Phase 1 and a Phase 2, from the current owners of the property, which is currently, I believe, the Industrial Authority, which is leased back to another company at the moment. And we reviewed that Phase 1, which also included prior Phase 1 environmental site assessments and Phase 2 reports, which included some limited site investigation inclusive of soil and groundwater samples. And we did not identify any recognized environmental conditions with respect to the property. We also looked at groundwater testing data from 1988. And then, as I mentioned, the Phase 1 that we looked at most recently included prior Phase 1s for Vertex, and then another prior Phase 1. And then we looked at a land application system report from 2020. And what that relates to is permitted land application systems with respect to a scrubber system, a water filter scrubber system, and the ability to spray polymers pursuant to a land application system onto the ground within the boundaries of the current operator. And we did note that there was a prior land application system permit that related to woven yarn. Essentially, back in the late 70s to 90s, I believe, there was a process that they went through to spin yarn. They did not do any manufacturing. It was a spinning process. And to remove yarn from the air, they had a scrubber system, and that included rinse water, basically. And that's the water that was, it was not contaminated, but that was the water that was sprayed out into the fields as part of the land application system. And then we also did review EPD information with respect to well testing sites. As noted, there are residents in the area, and we did have access to some well testing information with respect to private wells. So after we reviewed all of the information that we had, we reached the following findings and conclusions. First of all, the land in the Pittard Road area is all private land. Again, we note that there is some property that is owned by a development authority and leased back to a private company pursuant to a tax abatement deal. But practically speaking, all the land there is private, and so there is no right to access that land. We would need to get access agreements in place if we wanted to do any further investigation. In the event that there is any concern with respect to contamination. And just to be clear, I'm going to discuss this in a minute, but there is, as of yet, no indication of a release or contamination. We would need to go through the court, and we would have very limited rights to do so as a local government. That would be something that typically we would see the state or federal government do. They would have to get a court order to access the property and sample it. However, as noted, we did not see, which is a good thing, any evidence in the record of any environmental, health, or toxic substances that were released or of issue. Furthermore, to the extent that anything could possibly have been at the property, and I will note that there was one Phase 2 that showed that there was some isolated petroleum contamination around a former UST. It is isolated. There's no risk of exposure to anybody off-site, or no significant risk of exposure that would impact human health or the environment on-site. But to the extent that there is any contamination on the former DuPont facility, which is the primary property of interest within the Pittard Road area, there does not appear to be any risk of exposure for off-site residents. We have not seen any indication of any problems in drinking water wells that were sampled, with the exception of fecal coliforms, but that is unrelated. That's bacterial. It's unrelated to any contamination at any facility out there. With respect to, yes.
You said the acronym UST, and that's underground storage tank?
I apologize. Yes, it is underground storage tank, and there was a use of underground storage tanks at the property during prior operators. My understanding is that is no longer in use, and there was sampling done around the underground storage tank. It is not atypical to find some contamination in the area of an underground storage tank. That does not necessarily mean that there's any need to conduct any cleanup or any further investigation. There are specific levels that are established under law, and so long as the contamination is within those levels, as it is here, there's no risk to human health or the environment.
One other clarification, you mentioned fecal coliform, and I know from our water quality testing that that's pretty prevalent in streams and water bodies across Georgia. So that's not a unique situation necessarily.
No, and that would be something that would be dealt with at basically the pump level. That is not something that is a naturally occurring issue. It is bacterial only. There's nothing that would be causing it that stems from the facility at all. That would be something that would be dealt with through water sanitation at the level of the user. We also determined, based on EPA and EPD records, that there was no need for additional action based on their records, and they have not identified any concerns that require any additional action. And then one thing we did want to raise is that in the event any residents within the areas, we have not found anything that indicates that any additional action is necessary. However, one of the great things right now about what's going on with EPA and some federal funding is that there is an environmental justice program, and any resident in the area who feels that they need more information or they feel that something more needs to be done, there are other avenues now that we as a local government could not explore, but the EPA could walk through with any resident in the area, and the EPA could explore if they believe that it's warranted.
And you said, what kind of program was that again?
So EPA, for a long time, has had an environmental justice program. And the purpose of the environmental justice program, and actually this was part of the next slide, because we do have some good news about that, I think.
Okay.
EPA.
I'll wait till the next.
Oh, no, it's all right, it's part of it. So we are recommending hosting a public meeting to go over the results and taking a very transparent approach to everything and making information available. But EPA, there are two meetings that are going to be proposed. EPA, their environmental justice program representatives are going to come to one of the meetings, and they will go over various programs that are being put in place that EPA is doing. And one of them is it's a technical assistance program that they're calling TIC-TAC. And as part of that program around the country, including in connection with the University of Georgia, they are going to put in place a center where anybody within a low-income area, anybody that is within an environmental justice area, can go work with the center and get training on basically anything relating to the environment or energy. And so they will have a chance to look at various job opportunities. They will have a chance to look at other ways that they can explore their own environment if they have concerns about it. They will go as far as teaching people how to set up 501c3 organizations. So that's one of the things that EPA is going to come down and share at the public meeting. And in any questions that any resident has with respect to environmental justice, which is essentially, the environmental justice program is essentially a program that's put in place that gives people an opportunity if they are within an area of a lot of times it's not as much as it used to be, but a low-income area typically, but any area where they feel they are aggrieved environmentally, to come talk to EPA and get additional information and see what EPA can do for them if again it's warranted.
And I think after our meeting yesterday, even though April the 27th is up there for Pittard, actually the training and information from EPA is going to be April the 25th with Dunlap, right?
That's right. Tammy Thomas Burton from EPA is going to come on April 25th. She is the Region 4 coordinator, so she handles all of the EPA region states in the southeast. And she's going to bring materials to go over with people, tell them what they can look at. There are websites that EPA has set up even that outline environmental justice communities. And they do it based on income, they do it based on net worth, they do it based on historical concerns with respect to industrial contamination. And so people in the area will be able to see where they stand with respect to their communities, and they'll be able to look at various tools if they want additional information or look into how they, as residents and citizens, can get more information about their own community.
Thank you.
Yes.
Where is that meeting going to be on the 25th?
Next section.
Oh,
We'll have a
okay.
slide for that one.
Okay. I guess while we're here, just are these meetings going to be recorded so people can watch them later? Like, is PIO going to have someone set up there? Or?
I don't believe so.
Okay. I guess I imagine there might be a lot of interest that goes beyond who can attend that day, including I can say for myself specifically, like I'll be gone at a conference for this one, but if there's a way to record those meetings, I think that would be to the benefit of all.
Well,
possible.
I mean, the easiest way to do it would be to hold it in one of our facilities that's set up for that. And here we felt it was important to go into the neighborhoods and be accessible. So I understand, but that's sort of the tension we're trying to balance.
I recorded for you, Jess.
All right. Yeah, if Commissioner Taylor wants to just, record it on your device and post it, sure. Yeah.
I have a couple questions about the DuPont plant. When was that operational? When did it shut down? And what did they make? What kind of?
Sure, it was the mid-90s, through the mid-90s, and what they did was essentially spin yarn. We haven't found any evidence that they were actually actively manufacturing anything. It was mostly spinning pre-made yarn, synthetic nylon yarn, and as a result of that spinning process, it was done very quickly, and so fibers would come loose, and that's why they had the scrubbing system in the air, and essentially as part of that scrubbing system, they would use water, and the water would basically act as, obviously a way to capture the fibers. And then there was a a spray field application, and that's what the application was.
So it was, the wastewater was sprayed onto the surrounding fields, and the contamination was the nylon fibers, like fibers?
To be clear, it wasn't contamination. It was a permitted process, and there's nothing to indicate that any of this was hazardous.
Okay, so those fibers are not considered hazardous?
No, they're not considered hazardous.
Okay.
It was just, and it was a minimal amount. I mean, it was intended to be a scrubbing process where you basically take in the fibers, and through an air scrubber, it would be a filter, a vacuum-type filter, and then very little of the actual water would come into contact with those fibers. But basically, some of that water is recycled back into the system, and then some of it was used in a land application.
And the underground tank that you spoke of, what is that containing? I seem to have missed that.
There was an underground storage tank that was located at the facility, and they're pretty common at most facilities of this type. It used petroleum products, and once it was closed, it was not a large tank. I think it was around 500 gallons or something like that. So, compared to, for example, a gas station has a 10,000 gallon underground storage tank. So we're talking more of a backup type heating oil petroleum tank. And it had petroleum products, and those petroleum products, at least a de minimis amount, somehow got into the ground. That could have been through overfilling. That's very common, when they come in and they basically fill the tank back up. It could be that there was a minor hole or small hole in it. That's very common as well. But whenever they go in and close a tank, they take samples around that underground storage tank. Either they remove it or they close it in place with concrete. They'll take samples around it to make sure that there is no release that requires any cleanup. And in this particular situation, they detected some xylenes. It's a common chemical in petroleum. And it was at a level that did not require any additional action. And again, even had it been at a level that did require on-site, for example, monitoring, it probably would not have required anything beyond monitoring. But if it did, it would not have caused any contamination off-site. So it was not at a concentration that could have migrated to any other property. And as additional evidence that there's no concern with that, there have been a number of wells tested in the area, and there was no indication of any problem, with the exception of the bacteria, which again is naturally occurring, and it's something you treat at the source through disinfection and things like that.
Okay. Are there any other questions on Pittard Road?
I think Patrick had his hand up.
Yes. So I just want to make sure that, so everything that you have done was just research based on EPA's finding, correct? So you didn't actually go to Pittard Road and test the property, or find a consultant to test outside or test within the area, but that everything that you've done was just from findings from EPA, is that correct?
Actually, very little came from EPA. Just to clarify, we have, and if it's okay, I'm going to go back to the prior slide so we can go through what came from where. With respect to EPA, we have information that's connected to the Department of Justice complaint. The Department of Justice complaint was based on EPA findings. And so EPA did at one point investigate a number of DuPont facilities, Invista facilities, and they did determine that there were violations of various permits and that they had administrative violations. With the exception of that, there was very little in the EPA's files with respect to EPA, or in respect to this site. With respect to the public health investigation, that was a county inspection that was done in connection with the State Department of Health and Human Services under federal oversight. So there was, in connection with that, there was the county, the state, and the federal government. And with that investigation, they did go out and they met with residents in the area. Now, keep in mind, these are residents who are willing to meet with them, so they didn't go knock on doors and they couldn't talk to everybody. But individuals who were willing to talk to them, they did speak with. They did get information with respect to their past health and present health. And in addition to that, they got family histories. They also tested water wells in the area and did not find any concerns in connection with the property. With respect to the Phase 1 and Phase 2 studies, when you do a Phase 1, the consultant does go out and they do survey the property. So they do look at things, they do kick the tires, so to speak. They also conduct a database review, and that's just part of a standard Phase 1. And it will go through and pull all state and federal information from available databases, and it's pretty comprehensive. So those all were reviewed. And then with respect to EPD, that is where we got information with respect to some well testing information. Again, the coliform issue, and then we also got the permits associated with the land application process.
But you yourself or no consultant went out, just did independent testing. It was all information that was given from the Phase 1, Phase 2, the environmental assessment, and EPD and EPA, correct?
That's correct. We would not have the right to access the properties. In order to do so, we would either need to get permission from a landowner or occupant, or we would need to get a court order to do so. With respect to, I don't know if somebody would give us access to go sample and do our own survey, but with respect to a court order, it would be very difficult to get that because we're not seeing any indication of any environmental concerns.
And for the Phase 1 and Phase 2 groundwater, can you explain that? Does that include soil or just water sampling from water runoff or at the wells?
So with the Phase 1, there's no actual sampling. That's more of a database review, and it is a survey, a visual survey of the property. And you go through and you determine whether or not there are other areas that require additional investigation. In this particular situation, with respect to the most recent Phase 1, there was no indication, at least in the view of the consultant, and I haven't seen anything to indicate that this is not correct, but at least in the view of the consultant, that additional investigation was warranted. So they did not recommend a Phase 2 investigation, and that's where you would go out and collect additional soil samples or groundwater samples. Now, the Phase 1, the most recent one that we reviewed, had information from a prior Phase 2. So at one point, a consultant did go out and they did do a Phase 1, and they determined it made sense given the prior use, that there was an industrial use, and because of a UST and things of that nature, that it made sense to go ahead and conduct some limited testing. And what they do when they do Phase 2 testing is they identify the areas that are actually concerns. They call them areas of concerns a lot of times. And so they say why you should test that area, and they explain what you should test it for. So, you know, it's not a situation where you go out and sample random areas for various chemicals. You isolate the areas of concern, and then based on that and based on your actual concern, you decide what you test for. And those tests did not indicate that there was any problem.
After our meeting the other day, Ms. Davis, you did explain about private property, and could you explain to those of us that are here now, what are the pros and cons of a private, and you may be doing this later in your presentation.
No,
What are the pros and cons of a private resident wanting testing?
So it can, in some respects, open up Pandora's box. If you go out and do indiscriminate testing, you can find things that are not necessarily an exposure concern, but can create a big headache for landowners. In Georgia, in any situation, if you go test property, there are certain risk reduction standards that you compare any results to. And I'm not suggesting there will be anything on any of these properties at all. But if you were to go out and test, for example, soil, and the soil comes back with lead contamination, and lead is a naturally occurring substance. For residential, it can exist at 75 milligrams per kilogram without any problem. But if you hit a certain level, you will need to notify EPD of that level, even though it may be something that has nothing to do with the former DuPont plant, and perhaps nothing to do with anything other than background. It would be high background, but it's possible. That resident would then have to report the information to EPD. They would then have to go through kind of the hassle of dealing with EPD. Ultimately, EPD would probably come back and say, this is not a reportable release, thank you for letting us know. However, if something were to be reported and EPD were to determine that there was a problem, that resident could be on the hook potentially for that contamination, even though there's no indication that the resident did it. It's just by virtue of the fact that they own it. And that's especially true if there's nothing on the former DuPont plant that indicates that that contamination came from there.
Patrick?
Yes. So don't you think that for a resident, even if it's not DuPont or whoever, it's for their betterment to know that their land or their soil is contaminated? Because if it's a high level of lead, they're planting in the yard, they're consuming or whatever, and it's, there's some detriment to their health and to, so regardless of, of where the problem may have arisen, still, I think it's, there's nothing. So let me back up. So what is wrong? Okay, doing all the phases and the environmental studies, did anyone test the soil, just random sampling of the soil, not wells or water sampling? And I completely understand the legal aspect of, or the legal concern of asking residents, but there's nothing wrong with just asking a resident, hey, can we test your property?
So again, it depends. And the next step in that process will be, where do you want to test on the individual properties, and what do you want to test for? And that goes back to the discussion about the phase one. Typically, if you were going to test a property, you look at the prior uses, you look at what the actual risk is, and then based on the actual risk of contamination, and you identify what that potential contaminant is, you decide how to test and what to test for. In this particular situation, it would be difficult to determine what to test for, what depths to go down, and whether or not we would limit it to soil, and whether we would look at soil in just a random area of the property, especially given the size of the property, or whether we would look at an area close to the house. You wouldn't want to go out and basically, I hate to use the expression, but Swiss cheese the property, right? Because it's expensive, and you really want to have some kind of sampling plan that kind of addresses what the actual concern would be. And right now, we don't know what that concern would be. And just to give you an idea of what options will be available, you've got various metals, many of which are naturally occurring. You've got chemicals called SVOCs, and those will be pHs. You've got VOCs, and those will be volatile organic compounds. And it gets very expensive, and there's just no basis for believing that there's anything out there that would cause a problem. Now, if there were, for example, an indication in the cancer study that there truly was a cluster in the area, so if we go back to when that took place, if we had seen something in that study, then it probably would have made sense to do the testing you're talking about. Then we would want to look and say, okay, we've got a situation where there could be an increased risk of cancer in the area, so what's causing it? What do we need to look at? And at that point, you would look more into, is there an environmental factor, and should we go out and sample? Another scenario would be, suppose there had been actual contamination in the water that was tested. Then we would say, okay, why is there contamination in this water? And we would look at whether it made sense to test in the area of those wells, to put in groundwater sampling wells in the area, or to go back to, say, the former DuPont plant and say, we are finding contamination in these wells. We need you as the plant operator to look into this. We're telling you to do it. But, you know, given where we are right now, it's probably not worth going out. And I'm not saying not worth as in a person's health is not worth it. I'm saying it's just not worth the expense to go out and try to find something that may or not be there. And if it is, it's probably an isolated area, and we're probably not going to hit it anyway. Does that make sense? Does that answer your
I would beg
question?
to differ to say if it's worth
Sure.
it. It's somebody's life.
No, I'm not, and to be clear, I'm not suggesting that at all. I mean, that
We
is
just simply
absolutely
don't
not.
have any indication of a hazardous substance at this point.
We wouldn't have any idea where to, let's see if I can, I was going to try to zoom in. We wouldn't have any idea, if you look at the properties, basically to the north, I guess it would be the northeast, they are different sizes, and some of it appears to be in use, some of it appears to be just be land. We wouldn't know where to go out and test. And the problem is, if we were to go out and try to find something, it would be like a needle in a haystack. And, you know, we wouldn't know what to test for because there's no indication of contamination in the area. And second, if we did find something, we wouldn't have any idea what the source of it is because there's nothing to link it back to the former DuPont plant. And third, I would be concerned, and here's my actual concern when I say that the resident may not think it's worth it. If, for example, you've got somebody out, you've got people who have been living out there for a long time, and they have changed motor oil on their properties, and they have dumped fertilizer on their properties, and they have, you know, used their properties the way they want to use their properties. Not any contamination that anybody else has brought to it, but they have done what they want to do for the last 50 years, changed oil. Some people, I'm not a fan of it, but some people dump used oil to control weeds. And what I don't want to do is create a scenario, not knowing what they want to do, where we go out, we test the ground, we pick up their prior uses of the property, which never would have been detected and would otherwise have been fine and not have created an exposure risk for them, when we don't have any indication that there's any contamination from an offsite source. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Any, Commissioner Holt?
I think just one thing I'm not following here. Let's say that there were residents who did want their soil tested, understanding what you've just described here in terms of the risk to them, and you do that kind of more comprehensive panel of testing, not knowing what you're looking for, but just trying different things, and you do happen to notice a high prevalence of something. Couldn't you then go back and test the adjacent industrial site for that thing that you found a prevalence of that hasn't yet been tested for, if you found it on a different adjacent lot?
Not without a court order. So typically, let's assume that happens. Suppose we go out and we test that very bottom one, right? If you look at kind of the diamond, the one closest to the former DuPont plant. We go out, we test it, we find that there are elevated levels of SVOCs. Those are semi-volatile organic compounds, PAHs. You know, so we test it, and we have to report it to EPD. EPD will then have the option of doing a call-in letter, and what they can say is, hey, former DuPont plant, and basically it will be to the current owners, which will be probably the industrial authority and the current lessee, say, hey, we have found contamination. We believe it's a level that is reportable and may require some action, and therefore we are demanding that you go out and you test your own property. And so former DuPont, and they don't have to do it. EPD does not have to do this. It's somewhat discretionary. Former DuPont plant goes out and it test the property, and they don't find anything that indicates an SVOC. And just to give you an idea of where an SVOC can come from, it can come from railroads. It's burned charcoal can create SVOCs. Any type of burned fossil fuel can create it. And so now you've got a situation where the owners of the DuPont plant have gone out, they've tested, there's no indication that there's anything there. And so as far as the DuPont plant goes, it's done. If there's no indication that its property is causing the contamination, there's not much more you can do at that point. Does that make sense?
I mean, it does, but I guess that would mean that we've gotten to a point where if something were identified on somebody's property or some of these properties, then they'd have the opportunity to look, and then maybe, ultimately the DuPont property isn't identified as the culprit for it, but at least then we would know, whereas right now it's sort of an unknown. And I mean, you mentioned the railroad, which I think is interesting because we have that railroad easement that's also right along here. So, I guess I'm just wondering, like, if there are things we haven't tested for yet, and there is a desire among residents to have their properties tested, could we not then do that? And if we find some kind of pattern, then go out and test, whether it's the DuPont site or along the railroad easement, to try to figure out if there's a cause from an adjacent lot and not just them or a previous owner dumping motor oil on their lawn.
So I hear what you're saying, but just keep in mind it would open up the can of worms scenario I was talking about before. Even again, SVOCs burn charcoal, which is, if you've had somebody burning stuff for 50 years on property, it's a possibility that it will be there. Same thing, pesticides, things like that. So yes, in theory, if a resident says, we want our property tested, there is a testing protocol that can be done. Of course, it's going to cost money, but there's a testing protocol that can be done. But after that, the problem is, again, that there's nothing to link it to the DuPont plant. So again, it's that's a decision that would need to be made, but it would be very difficult, is all I'm saying, to link it to something else.
Commissioner Wright?
Yeah, I was just thinking that the meeting, if we go back to the date of that meeting on April 27th, those that are looking for additional insights with this and how private property owners can have their property tested, I don't know that we need to continue to spend time from outside counsel that's been hired. They've done their part that we've asked them for, and then we didn't get to the part, there's a date from an EPA meeting as well. That's a second date, right?
There's a whole nother half to this presentation.
Yeah, so that's coming up, and it could be that after that's happened, that people might have a better idea of how to tell private property owners how to have their land tested. And then the EPA, it sounds like they're connected to those reports versus us trying to get on private property to find something.
I do think that's the better option. And the reason is, again, EPA has, their abilities are greater than ours with respect to this issue. EPA can review the data, and they can review it from the federal government perspective. They also can reach a conclusion. EPA can also, at the request of residents, conduct a health study, another health study, if that's what people want. There's enough behind it. So they can do it, and they can do more than just go out and test the property. I mean, they can actually, again, meet with people, talk to people, put all the information into their database, see what comes up, see how this compares to other areas, see whether or not, again, it warrants an actual health study. They can look at the history of the property in ways that we really can't do right now.
Right.
If that makes sense.
With all the examples that you gave, definitely. But I think that for this topic is to move on to the next part of it as well.
I will interject. County Manager Blaine at the meeting said that we could share this information with people outside of the local government and consultants. And I have been forwarding information to an environmental group that I've been a part of for years. So I'm hoping that they'll be able to come down to one or both of the meetings. But I don't want to muddy the water with different opinions, but these are experts also, just like Ms. Davis, that if people are feeling more comfortable to hear it from someone that's not connected. Yes, Commissioner Lane.
Yeah, I did reach out to folks from the Upper Oconee Watershed Network, and they have some, pretty renowned scientists and hydrologists associated with that group, and I made them aware that this presentation was going on. So I'm hoping that some of those folks.
Are you going to stay in contact with them?
Yes, yes. I asked them to watch this presentation and, forward any concerns and pay attention to this issue moving forward. And I'll make sure they're aware of those 2 public meetings as well.
Commissioner Davenport?
Yes, so I'm really appreciating this work session, and, and I thank all you guys and our former commissioner for allowing, general funds to help pay for this study, but this has been helpful to me because a lot of my constituents and old former constituents ask questions, and thank you for yesterday's presentation as well to help break it down, because there are a lot of people that I know who are low income who are not going to be able to make it to the 25th or to the 27th. So at least the question that they have already asked me, I can ask you now and then relay it to them tomorrow. So I really appreciate your time and my colleagues' time as well. But if y'all are ready to move on to Dunlap Road.
That one was supposed to be the easy one.
Well, and I will say, we're going to attempt to put this where it's accessible by the public, the mountain of documents that we gave you by the link, and tonight it'll go live, so it'll be open for anybody to look at. And hopefully, because I appreciate that y'all asked for at least the initial look, because we hear it every so many years. There's just long-standing concerns around these, and we want to uncover the facts and share them with everyone, and then hear more. So we're looking forward to that public hearing. So if y'all are good, we'll move on to Dunlap Road. Okay, Mike, you still with us? Oh, Suki, sorry.
I am.
Whoa!
About 60 miles outside of Atlanta.
Suki's going to do the lead on the summary for this, but Mike has also been instrumental in this one as well.
All right. Oh, yes, Patrick.
I feel bad for Mike.
Commissioner Davenport.
Blake, could Mike be let go, or?
Well, he's common to both, so if it's okay. And Mike, if you can still stay with us, we'll get through this as well.
Until the pilot tells me to shut everything down, I'll stay with you.
Awesome. Thank you. I apologize about my voice, you all. I have got something going. Oh, hold on 1 second. It's asking to restart the computer.
Oh.
Yes. So I'm going to stop the restart. All right. Thank you for having me tonight. And yes, I'm going to go over Dunlap Road, and then at the end, I'll let Rebecca come up so she can give you, kind of summarize what research we did on the Dunlap Road site. All right, the area of interest for us, I think you already know, I was here just recently going over landfill issues with financial issues and other, but you can see this map, we're right off Lexington Road. We have over 400 acres that abut Oglethorpe County, and I talked about how we operate out there with 5 phases and 2 existing disposal areas that are now closed. Here is, again, the architectural drawing that we have from Atlantic Coast Consulting. There are consultants at the landfill and have been for over 15 years. Tonight we're going to talk about the research and investigation we did into historical environmental health issues at the landfill and findings and recommendations. What we did for this particular report was I specifically looked at the known environmental health issues we had back in 1988 and what we put into place to protect the environment at the landfill proper and the surrounding community. Back in 1988, we had we had wells, believe it or not, weirdly enough, you wouldn't think this would be occurring, but in 1988 and prior, we had drinking water wells on the landfill property proper. And we had folks that lived on the landfill. They were our caretakers. And what we had was water that was ill-smelling, had an odor, and it had a discoloration. That triggered an investigation, and that was the drinking water well for staff, you all, and for the caretakers that lived on the property. That's how this was found. And upon investigation, they found tetrachloroethylene and vinyl chloride at levels that exceeded what would be acceptable for drinking water wells. So we immediately closed those wells and then started testing to see the extent of the contamination. And so we called in EPD, Environmental Protection Division. They came out and started testing beyond the landfill property. They did not find any tetrachloroethylene or vinyl chloride in the wells outside of the landfill property at that time. But because we had it on the landfill property itself, we actually did several things to try to start mitigating the issues there. And what we looked at was corrective actions, and some of the corrective actions we've done to date was we capped and closed the existing disposal areas, 1 and 2. 1 was where we're having the problem, so we capped that the year after the discovery. The existing disposal area 2 was capped later in 1997. Those 2 pieces of property were what people historically call dumps. They were not landfills covered by RCRA, Subtitle D, which is the Resource Conservation Recovery Act that EPA passed that told us how to properly build landfills. At the last work session I was at, I described to you how we properly build what we call modern sanitary landfills today. Those 2 were not. Those were not lined, and so that's where the problem was found. So we capped, covered, and why that helps is when you cap those 2 existing disposal areas, you're limiting the amount of water that's percolating through. And so that's what we tried to do, is minimize water percolation and contributing to the groundwater contamination issue under that existing disposal area. So that's what we did first. We also purchased roughly 12 properties surrounding the landfill so that we could extend the buffer. We extended the buffer from 50 to 200 feet beyond where the contamination is. Commissioner Davenport asked me to use layman's term, but I'm trying to do it tonight, Patrick. In the report, you'll see plume. The plume just means that's where the contamination was. The plume is the entity in the groundwater that contains that contamination. And so we bought those 12 pieces of property so that we had more buffer, so that we could keep the plume or the contamination contained to landfill property. And then what we also did was landfill gas systems actually do a great job at helping pull in, draw in the water, and when the gas is being drawn to a facility to be generated into electricity. So we placed a landfill gas collection system on the landfill. It was installed in July of 2011. And then last but not least, we did intrinsic remediation, or what you might know as phytoremediation, or I'll even break it down simpler for Commissioner Davenport because he asked me to do so, which is using plants. Mainly at the landfill, we've used over 2,000 trees and shrubs to help draw up that plume and stop that plume from exiting the landfill property. Staff even went beyond with some of the remediation and actually dug trenches, which is another barrier to stop movement of water from one area to another. And so those are all some of the things that we did and have to continually do to present, along with all the testing that we do. Anyway, going back to this bulleted list, I just briefly went over the corrective measures that we do and continue to do. Along with that is all the testing. I want to make sure everybody understands that we probably have more permits at our facility than any other Athens-Clarke County government facility. We're permitted by the Water Protection Branch of EPD, the Land Protection Branch, and the Air Protection Branch. We have reports that go in monthly and quarterly and annually to all of those. So there are multiple geologists, hydrogeologists looking at all of our reports every time we put them in the system. So it's not, including our actual landfill consultant, Atlantic Coast Consulting. They're looking at it, and we are very fortunate in Athens to have our landfill administrator who's watching tonight. He couldn't be here, but he is with us, so if you have a question I can't answer, he will text it in. Brad Ricard is a certified geologist. And he historically, before he worked for the county, he worked for EPD and did inspections, and does groundwater testing and methane testing. So we did and still do all those corrective actions. We also still look at the citizen agreement that was that Oglethorpe County and Athens-Clarke County came together in 1992, and citizens laid out some requirements or some suggestions, expectations of the county when these two contaminants were found in that plume. And so what we did at that time is within 500 feet of the landfill boundary, we changed all the residents, including Billups Grove Baptist Church, at that time over to county water. We closed wells, we paid for the well closures, and we paid for the lines being laid so that all the residents, just about everybody in Dunlap Road, Robert Hardiman, Billups Grove Baptist Church, anywhere that there could have been an issue, were turned over to county municipal water from Athens-Clarke County Public Utilities. And then between 500 and 1,000 feet of our boundary, we tested the wells at that time to see if there were any exceedances, and at that time there were not. At that time, though, when we did go onto private property, I will tell you, we did, and we still have pictures and some testing where people were dumping oil on their property from a maintenance, a mom and pop maintenance shop. And so there was a tremendous amount of petroleum products poured on that, directly on the soil on that property. A lot of people in rural areas, and that's a rural area in our community, burn trash. There was a tremendous amount of evidence of municipal solid waste, everyday garbage being burned in those backyards. And then there was also evidence. I went back after the meeting with Commissioner Davenport and Commissioner Thornton, looked in our paper copies to find out, and this is just a quick search. I also found evidence of sewer lines being improperly connected. So we had sewer lines that weren't connected to a septic tank and weren't connected to sewer. So those are just some of the issues on those areas that we noticed and took notations down, so we would have that information for the future. And then beyond that, after those, and we offered, and we still offer annual testing of those wells that still might be between that 500 and 1,000 feet boundary. And since I've been director, I have not been asked to test anybody's water, and in my 18 years here, I went back and asked Brad, we have not been asked to test any well in that actually boundary. And then greater than 1,000 feet, we did not do anything, but we let them know if there was any issues, they certainly could come and talk to us, and we could see if there was something that would indicate there were issues that far away from a landfill buffer. So that's what we did. We also included in your information, back in 2000, we had a health consultation from the Georgia Department of Public Health, and at that time, they didn't see anything new that would be of concern to environmental health in that area. The only thing they really asked us to do beyond what we were already doing was make sure all the documents that we had, from testing documents and data to information from EPD, be available at the library. And y'all, I don't know if it was available at the library at that time. I assume it was. I wasn't working for Athens-Clarke County at that time. I did call the library. They couldn't put their fingers on it when I called before the meeting, but I'm going to have to, I feel safe that it was probably done at that time. Whether it's still there, I do not know. It really doesn't matter because we can put it all up, and a lot of this stuff will be going online tonight. We'll have that for you all. We have had complaints in the past go up to EPD and the Georgia Department of Public Health from groups in the area, and I included the response letters from the Georgia Department of Public Health and the Georgia EPD. Both declined to do any further health consultation or testing. They didn't feel like there was any new evidence that was would warrant another health consultation since the 2000. So I included that in there so you all could see the responses from EPD and Georgia Department of Public Health. I also included surface water tests that are performed by Athens-Clarke County Public Utilities, and then just some limited surface water tests from Atlantic Coast Consulting. Although I can pull surface water tests that we have to turn in annually, I can pull all of those and put those online if you wish as well. We have all those. Again, no exceedances from the landfill from any of the water tests that I included in this information. And then lastly, every 3 years, we have to do a status of remedial action review report, and that's required by Georgia EPD. Our first one was in 2016, the next one was 2020, and then the newest one was in 2022. And basically, that shows you all the water testing that we do. We have 64 total wells that test for groundwater on our property. There are about 46 of them that are in the area where this contamination, the plume, would be. And 43 of the 46 actually are below exceedance levels, meaning we are doing what we should be doing by phytoremediation, capping existing disposal area 1 and 2, trenching. So we have 3 more wells that are still above. That means they're still detecting those 2 compounds. But we had till 2031 to make sure there was no detects on any of the wells on our property. And these are groundwater wells. These are not drinking wells. These are groundwater wells. And I invite you out. You can walk along and see the wells with me at any time. We have methane monitoring wells and groundwater wells that we use out there to do testing monthly, quarterly, and so forth. And then we get inspected by EPD. Historically, it was a couple times a year. During COVID, there were some hiccups. We didn't get our twice a year inspections, but our most recent is from this past November 2022, and we did receive 100% on that inspection. So I included that in there for you also. And I can put other inspections up, or I can allow you to see those if you would like. We have all of that in reports that I have in my office. Lots of reports. The landfill has been here a long time, so there's lots of information that we can share with you. Overall, when we compiled all this information, the findings, and I don't know if Rebecca, if you want to take over at this time, or do you want me to charge there? Yes.
I think Patrick had a question.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I took a breath.
So some of the residents' concerns, it's fact, and I don't know what with Pittard Road, but some of the residents' concerns on Dunlap Road, why this keeps coming up, is that over the past 20 years, about 12 people have died of various cancers, mainly right along Dunlap Road. Can you explain the sewer line, because the sewer line connection, so sewer line is provided. I thought there was no sewer line out there.
I don't think there is sewer lines. The one I referred to was it was not properly connected to septic. And so
okay.
that's that, or anything for that matter. I just made the comment that there were notes in the information I have from the past director that when they started this process of testing wells around the landfill, they had to put down what they noticed were happening that could trigger a water issue when they did the testing. And one was they had septic material just entering the soil and not connected to anything in particular.
Okay, so the plumes, so there's 64 wells within the landfill that are tested.
Correct. 64 total around the landfill proper that don't just focus on the closed, but even on the active.
But what the plume is, that's on the outside.
No, the plume is on our property. The plume hasn't left the landfill property.
Okay.
And actually, it's retracting because we have some of these testing, we have 46 wells around what I would say that could be in proximity, the way the groundwater would move, that could trigger an exceedance. Like it could trigger us finding those 2 chemicals at levels they shouldn't be. And we have 46 in that immediate area, and 43 of them aren't showing that we're exceeding anything. Okay. 3 are, but it's all these wells are on landfill property.
So can you explain to the general public about soil testing? Could a contaminant from the plume get into the soil? possibly?
I probably wouldn't be the best. We don't soil test at the
Yeah.
landfill. We do water, we do methane, which can travel through the soil levels, but we haven't done any soil testing. So I might want to let Rebecca or somebody that might be able to speak maybe more eloquently than I could, Commissioner Davenport, about soil testing. We don't. It's not a requirement of any of our permits from any of the EPD branches.
So that's where the most of the concerns are coming from, is from the soil testing. And I get there's some very interesting people who want to change the oil and just dump it. I would love to get EPA out there and find them to make them clean that up. But can you briefly explain the health consultation that happened in 2000, what that comprised of? How was that done?
Well, they came out, we opened our reports at that time. I was not with the county, so I can only speak on what I've read, but we would have opened our books, so to speak, so they could look at any data that we have, and then they came out physically and looked at our site, looked at the surrounding sites. So they did physical, they looked to see if there was any physical evidence, looked at any of our data to indicate that we had anything going on that could have been an issue. So they would look, they didn't do any new testing, if that's what you're asking, Commissioner Davenport, but they looked at the data that we had, and then they did a walk around and looked at the site physically.
But no consultation with the public?
At that time, it was triggered by, I think it was by the public wanting it. I don't recall at that time if there was a public meeting associated with it. What I can do, Commissioner Davenport, is reread that and make sure. But I don't think there was a public meeting during that time. Usually they walk around, historically, when I've been at other places, they walk around with staff to look at the site and then look at the data from the site, or data that they have pulled from EPD or other sources.
That's it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions before Suki said? Okay, come back.
Do you want me to cover? And she's here with me for questions.
Is it just chlorinated solvents?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I may be able to help you a little bit with your question. All right, chlorinated solvents they're around for a long time. And as they degrade over time, the plume actually, as Suki mentioned, retracts. And you think of it as like a balloon. And so Commissioner Wright, I hate to do it to you. You are a pollution source.
I'll do it.
And I'm a resident. All right.
handle it.
Commissioner Davenport, you are the end of the plume. And over time, as these remedial measures are put in place and they take effect, the plume retracts, and suddenly it's Commissioner Lake, and she's the plume. And then suddenly Commissioner Taylor, and then ultimately it's going to be a much smaller plume around Commissioner Wright. And with chlorinated solvents, the issue is not necessarily the soil. So you're not going to have Commissioner Wright's pollution going over to a residence location and then suddenly going up into the soil. The issue is going to be that there's going to be migration onto an off-site source. And then you're going to have, the biggest issue with chlorinated solvents is they're very volatile, and you could have those chlorinated solvents go up into soil gas and into the air. And the big concern is often into a building. So there are ways to actually model it, and I don't know if that's been done yet, but there are ways to model it, just desktop modeling, and it's not difficult to do. And there's a system called Vissel, and you put in your parameters, and you can determine based on distance from the actual end of the plume. Let's say you're still the end point of the plume. We can determine based where you are to where I am, whether or not there is a true concern about soil gas and exposure. So the issue is not necessarily the fact that it's present. The issue when it comes to groundwater a lot of times is whether there's exposure. And I think that's what we need to look at. Does that make sense and help answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Either way.
I will kind of go over the findings, but if you want to ask Rebecca anything, please feel free. there was no evidence in the record of any new environmental health concerns. We are, and knew we had historical groundwater contamination, and it's in corrective action, and we are legally bound to continue to take care of what was found back in 1988. Current data demonstrates that the implementation of our ongoing remedial measures is responsible for the improved groundwater quality on our site. The landfill has been consistently in compliance, and there was no evidence that would raise new environmental justice related issues or environmental justice related issues, but definitely we do have a perception issue at the landfill. We haven't, we maybe need to tell our story better and invite the public and have more public engagement so they understand and speak in terms that are understandable. Commissioner Davenport, I know you have told us that we need to make sure we don't use scientific terms but layman's terms so everybody understands what we're talking about. So what we are doing is doing just that. We presented our findings here tonight and in a report to you all a couple weeks ago. We're making the summary report available tonight after this meeting, and so all of those documents from Pittard Road and Dunlap will go live. And we'll provide information for well testing in the Dunlap Road area per the citizens agreement. It's been available, but we'll make sure people understand what area can have well testing, that's water testing. We are hosting a public meeting to share all these results, and then depending on comments from the public that evening, we can always ask for another health assessment. We could ask EPD if they would do an operational review. I will say a health assessment has already been turned down, as EPD has already turned down. They're not going to typically come to a site unless there's evidence to bring them to that site. And we've been turned down for additional health assessments, and that information was included in this in the downloads. And we could also have a third party, a consultant, landfill consultant, just look over our current data that we report to the state, to all those branches that I mentioned earlier. But more importantly, we're having a public meeting on April 25th at 6 p.m. at Phillips Grove Baptist Church. Solid waste will be on hand, sustainability will be on hand, and more importantly, EPA will be there and Rebecca will be there. Rebecca will be taking the lead for us that evening, and the manager's office will be there, and of course, all of you are invited, and anybody in the county is invited, not just Dunlap Road residents, but anybody in the county can attend these meetings. So we invite folks to the meetings, both meetings. You can go to both meetings. EPA will only be at the first meeting, which is the Dunlap Road meeting.
And Phillips Grove will be recording. They have a camera system set up, so it will be live on Facebook, and you go to their Facebook page.
And I wanted to make sure, Rebecca, did you need to add anything to what
No, just I want to point out with respect to EPA, again, they are going to be there, and this is something that they are going to review the information before they're there. They're going to review summaries, and so they'll have an opportunity to address questions. And obviously, when you get to a landfill, this is a very well-run landfill, but I know that people have questions about it, and so they should be able to address a number of those questions. And again, provide information. There's a lot of information through EPA, especially through their environmental justice program, about landfills. And so I think it really is a good opportunity for people to get a good understanding of publicly available resources and opportunities that they may have. And it very well could be that even if EPD does not feel a need to do any additional investigation with respect to a public health survey, even if we were to run, the VISL calculations that I talked about, and I can even show you those after the meeting. I've got one on my phone. I can even show you.
And Brad just chimed in. There was exposure modeling based on groundwater contamination. So
There you go.
we've already done it.
There you go. And I can still give you an example on my phone. I've got one. I can show you exactly how it works. So people will have the opportunity, again, to look at the area, look at opportunities, look at various things that they can do going forward if they still have questions. But as Suki mentioned, I think the issue is really just finding a way to get people information, because there is a lot of information out there. There's a lot of good information out there. This is a landfill that has quite a bit of oversight. And right now, everything's on Geos, I think. But it's not the easiest system in the world to use. You've got to have a password. You've got to have login information. So I think the way that we're going about it now may be really positive for people so they can see real-time data and see what's actually going on. And there's a lot more transparency.
Yeah, this is for Suki. Just to refresh our memories, how much life does this landfill have left in it? When do we estimate that we will have no more room?
Well, it depends on recycling rates, and compaction rates, population rates, but right now about 37 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions, commissioners?
Nope, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, who is next? Oh, benefits and wellness strategy.
Thanks, Mike.
I was telling you about your hair. At your nails, it was all I see your nails. He goes, oh, I know where this is.
It does on the back side over here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wait.
It's good.
Are you ready, sir? Okay, next item, benefits and wellness strategy. Ta-da.
Hey, thank you, Commissioner. Good evening, and Mayor Pro Tem. Good evening, I'm Jeff Hale, I'm with HR, and I'm going to briefly introduce some guests we have tonight, some longtime and valued partners in the HR space in helping us work through benefits strategy, design, and funding. And so we have Epic Consulting here tonight. We have Senior Benefits Consultant Stephen McKenzie, who's going to walk you through the slides that we've provided and answer questions you may have, as will the HR team. We also have Irv Morris, who is principal with Epic Consulting here, and we appreciate the time tonight. So with no further delay, Stephen, thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Again, my name is Stephen McKenzie. I'm a benefits consultant with Epic. So I had the pleasure with working with you all for about 5 or 6 years now. The purpose of this presentation here is to really go over the medical plan utilization, what's driving costs, and compare those trends to benchmarks. Also kind of review some of the planned cost projections, especially related to the actives, and why we think those projections are coming in where they're at. And then finally, looking at some opportunities for benefit program changes. These can be enhancements or design changes, as well as some different things to put in place that would enhance the member experience. So first thing we're going to go through here is a utilization review, and the information you'll see on this, we're going through slides here. On this slide is from Anthem. Blue Cross Blue Shield of Georgia is your administrator for pharmacy and medical. And they provided this information to us in a session a couple weeks ago. I'm not going to go through every item on here, but a couple of things to point out. The top left-hand side of the page, your trend on a per member per month basis is about 8.4%. National averages trend last year was around 4.5%. So you're higher than trend, but it's important to note there that that national average trend includes after employers make plan design changes. So typically, employers make plan design changes to reduce cost, and that, of course, reduces the trend. You all did not make any changes last year to your plan designs. Where is the cost coming from? On the middle of the page there, you can see those blue bars represent your medical cost, and for the most part, with a little bit of ups and downs, they've been flat for the last couple years. A little bit of an increase, but nothing alarming. Where we've seen cost increase is on the pharmacy side of things. And I've got a slide here in a little bit that'll show you kind of what's driving those costs. But now you've surpassed benchmarks on the pharmacy side on a per month basis, while the medical side continues to be more favorable. However, overall, your per member per month is below where we see most benchmarks.
Can I just stop you, because I don't understand some of your language. What is the PM, like the first thing you?
Per member per month. It's just a way of adjusting your costs for the size of your group so we can compare you to other groups.
And that was at, over there on the left corner?
Yep. So a lot of the statistics you'll see here break it down into that metric, so you can compare, again, like I said, your size of a group to a different size of a group, maybe smaller or larger. And then when I mentioned benchmarks here, these benchmarks were provided by Anthem, and they are the government and municipality book of business for the state of Georgia that Anthem has. In terms of other cost drivers, in the bottom left-hand side, we call HCCs, or high-cost claimants. And for the purposes of this discussion, a high-cost claimant is any claimant over $50,000 in spend in a given year. That's a pretty normal metric, and so we have broken this out into non-high cost and high cost claimants. And you have about 10% of your members that are accounting for almost 30% of your total gross claims cost. That's not a significantly higher number, but it is a higher number than what we see for most clients. And I'll show you a slide here in a minute that demonstrates what's really driving that. Having said that, in terms of your wellness program that you have in place, which you do have a very robust wellness program compared to most clients you work with and most organizations, it does a really good job of meeting its goals. So in the middle of the page there is at-risk members. These are members who don't necessarily have a chronic or critical condition, but are borderline on becoming a large claimant, for instance, or having multiple conditions. 85, nearly 86% of members that are at risk are engaged with Anthem. In other words, Anthem is reaching out to them, hitting them with information about how they can better manage their health. These people are filling their prescriptions like they should, so they're engaged. The chronic folks who have typically multiple diagnoses, they frequent the doctor often, they take multiple prescriptions. Over 93% of those folks are engaged. And then finally, critical folks are those that have multiple comorbidities. These are folks that typically are your high-cost claimants. And what's a great statistic here is 98.6% of those folks are engaged. These are the people that need help, and they're getting help. And I think your wellness program does a great job of ensuring those people are meeting with Anthem and getting all of their blood work done, preventive exams and things of that nature. And that's also demonstrated on the right-hand side of the page there, which is, long story short, to say your membership generally goes and sees the doctor for PCP visits and preventive screenings more often than not. So that's typically going to help you in the long term control your trend. So while the last couple years you've seen high costs, I do think that your wellness program is doing a good job of probably managing that trend over the long term.
So the 49% is the decrease from what, just last year it was 51.9 that we had wellness adults upper right?
Correct,
Okay.
yes. Yep.
Because, so we just changed the platform and it's all in an app, and I think that there's some for me, I'm more active with it on the app.
Yep.
I'm hearing that other people haven't caught on yet. So I think we were at 60% at one year, at one time, so.
Yeah, and it'll take time for the folks to get adjusted to that, but that is a great tool, and I do think you'll see that catch up and get way back to where it was and even higher. That statistic by itself, obviously, is better than what we typically see from a client like yourself. People are more engaged with their wellness here than they are at other organizations, for sure.
And so the numbers that you're using that Commissioner Myers asked about earlier, the PMP, does that level us out as far as, like you're saying, it makes it comparable
Exactly,
with the numbers?
exactly.
And then it doesn't take in effect so that our vacancy rate, because it could be that we have people who've left
Sure.
because they weren't as dependent on their coverage, and the people who stayed are the ones.
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's going to play out with the way you're comparing.
Exactly, yeah. And given that the benchmark here is like organizations like yourself in the state of Georgia that are government municipalities, they're going to have similar sort of turnover and similar sort of population as well.
Okay, thank you.
When we look at what is, again, sorry, a busy slide here, but what's driving your costs, these are your top 5 cost drivers. Number 1 and number 2 here we've seen on your plan for a number of years. They're not uncommon, but there's a couple things I think we can do to address those. The first is musculoskeletal, so these are back, knee issues, things of that nature. That was a large cost driver last year, and it continues to be an even larger one this year. Its per member per month trend was 33% year over year. Cancer is another one that we've seen continue to be in the top 2 or 3 over the last few years. That one had a 43% trend. One note on that, which I'll talk about in a minute, we're beginning to see a lot of the cancer treatments take place on the pharmacy side. Whereas typical chemo and radiation was in the medical setting, now those costs and those treatments have shifted to pharmacy. Good news is the treatment and oftentimes even a cure can take place. The bad news is your pharmacy costs do go up because of that. And then number 3 here, this is a good trend, and it's health status. So down a little bit year over year, but relatively flat. The fact that health status is number 3 is good because this includes things like preventive screenings. You can see COVID testing, things of that nature. Everybody's going to the doctor for the right reasons. So while you're incurring cost because of the high utilization here, it's likely that you're preventing future cancer, higher cost claims, circulatory claims, things of that nature that you can get checked at a preventive screening. So that's a good news there. And then this slide here is a utilization review on your pharmacy specifically. I'm not going to go through all of the drugs here, but in the pharmacy side of things, we have 2 components. We have one that's called specialty and non-specialty. Think of non-specialty as your average generic drug or your Lipitor, the drugs that are fairly common in the marketplace. Specialty drugs are drugs that treat specific conditions that are rare oftentimes, and more importantly, for your plan costs, specialty drugs are very expensive. They're typically thousands, tens of thousands, oftentimes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to treat these conditions. Question? Yes?
Yes, so thank you for this. Most of those brand names, I have no idea what they are. But the first one, inflammatory condition, what is that?
So Humira treats a number of conditions. Plaque psoriasis, it treats 5 or 6, 7, 8 different conditions. Rheumatoid arthritis is another good one. Yeah, you've probably seen a commercial for it. It is one of the largest drugs. It's probably the largest drug on the market right now. And I highlighted that one out, and I'll go ahead and comment on it because in the marketplace today, you have brand drugs and generics for most medications. Humira is a specialty drug. And so the closest thing that's coming out to a generic drug for a specialty drug is what we're calling biosimilars. So you can see here, Humira was your number 1 cost driver across all medications last year. The good news with that is we are seeing these biosimilars begin to launch in 2023, which the hope is that by 2024, we'll start to see these costs come down a little bit. Because they're taking essentially a generic version of that drug. So that is some good news, even though it's your number one driver up there. I did want to point out, and it's hard to see in the purple up there, but cystic fibrosis, you have a couple of patients that have cystic fibrosis. It's costing you, I want to say, I think it's around $600,000 a year. And generally speaking, for a client of your size, we would expect none or one of these types of patients. So unfortunately, it's just the luck of the draw in that you have two of them, and it's a large contributor to your plan cost. Yes?
Okay, another thing, so I see diabetes up there twice, and I just want to clarify, no, diabetes up there a couple of times. The RXS column, and it has the numbers, those are the amount of employees who have prescription?
Those, not particular employees, number of scripts.
What is that?
So if I filled 12 scripts in a year and I was the only person on this list, there would be 12 there.
Okay.
Yep. So not actual number of members. So yeah, diabetes is a common top 25 diagnosis or indication that we see in these lists. So really what we want to do is make sure these members are engaged in getting their A1C checked and making sure they're engaged with their doctor and Anthem like we saw on the previous slide. The last thing to point out on here is what's in green, and that's cancer claimants. It's what I mentioned earlier. So typically we would have seen a lot of these cancer costs on the medical side of things as folks had chemotherapy, radiation treatment to treat those conditions. Now some of these treatments are actually cures, and we're seeing them as in a pill form taking place on the prescription drug side of things. So that cost is shifting out of the medical side, which we kind of saw your medical costs be flat, and now it's occurring on the pharmacy side. Any other questions?
Jesse?
This is our last utilization slide, right? Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious, do we have, or would it be possible without too much hassle to get utilization data based on the types of positions and or amount of salary staff is earning? I have concerns that our healthcare is affordable for people who are in entry-level positions or who are earning lower salaries, and so some combination of either like tiers of their salary amount and or their years of experience and or their the position tier, I guess. Within
Yeah. Anthem is not going to have that sort of data, but we can probably work with HR and trying to cross-reference some of the utilization that we're seeing and give you guys, kind of like a ballpark range of where we're seeing the utilization occur.
I'd be very interested in that, and just to my colleagues, it seems to me like we've got a good plan if you can afford it, but we have a lot of folks who really struggle to afford this, especially at some of those entry-level positions. And we're talking about recruitment and retention. If we're trying to sell our healthcare plan as a good recruitment tool, I think we want to make sure that it's something that the people we're hiring can actually afford to use. So.
And I've got a slide in just a minute here that's probably going to talk about just what you're mentioning. Any other questions? Okay. So this next slide here and the next few ones are financial related, and these are projections and kind of what's driving costs from Epic's point of view. I'm not going to go through all the numbers here, but Epic performs projections for you all using standard actuarial methodology. This here is the active projection, so we also do projections for your pre-65 retirees. Those costs have been relatively stable over the last few years. On the active side of things is where we've seen costs increase. Essentially what we do is we take a look at your current head count. We look backwards at claims, medical and pharmacy claims, and then trend those forward. So we have to make assumptions about what the healthcare trend is going to be over the next 12 months. We take into account other things like you all pay Anthem to administer your plan. You have stop loss, which is a catastrophic protection for large claims. And then you also get rebates back from Anthem from utilization of your membership using brand drugs. So we take into account all the information and then add in some other items such as your HSA annual deposits, wellness incentives, wellness budgets to get a total cost. And that total cost is roughly a 10% cost increase over the previous year. So if I'm looking at calendar year or fiscal year 24, the cost right now is as we're projecting today, is about 10% higher than what historically occurred. So the other thing that this takes into a little bit of account is at the bottom line there, which is the red employee contributions. That acts as essentially a revenue, so it offsets the gross cost of your plan, and that revenue received from the employee after taking into account becomes your net cost. So we wanted to give you guys an idea of what it was going to look like on a fiscal and calendar year basis. This is very similar to what we've shown in the past, so if there's any questions about methodology or whatnot, we can certainly answer those, but it should be pretty similar to what you've seen. In terms of where the cost increase is coming from, very similar our findings to what Anthem was showing. The blue bar here are claims under 50,000, that same threshold. This is looking back all the way to 2019. The yellow orangish bar are claims over 50,000. This story is the same as what Anthem was showing. Really, the majority of your cost are large claimants. We did have a significant cost back in 2020 and 2021 from COVID, and now the cost drivers tend to be those pharmacy prescriptions, those specialty prescriptions I mentioned on earlier slides. When we break it down in just a annual basis and looking at, for instance, all claims over 50,000, you can see back in 2019 you had 69 of those, and now we're at 100 as of 2022. If I break down claims over 50,000 on a per 1,000 member basis, so adjusting for headcount as it goes up and down, you can see here that metric has continued to rise. So your frequency of claims is up 16.5% on average per year, and then the average claim cost that we've seen over this time has increased 12.3%. Yes, sir.
This is going to be, hopefully I don't take this wrong. Are we seeing do we have a lot of seasoned employees?
So,
sorry to say that.
You have a very diverse workforce, right? So you have everybody from police department to accountants. You have folks that are probably longtime employees. I think if we looked at what your average age was, which is a metric we can certainly do and compare that to benchmarks, we'd probably find you're slightly older than the average. That's probably a fair statement, but that's something that we can get you a definitive answer on.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks. This kind of echoes something I asked at one of these a while ago. It might have been last year's version of this. Is there a way that we can get the claims data broken down by department? And I ask this because, I also wonder, we're suffering employee shortages. We have a lot of people working a lot of overtime. People are more likely to get injured or suffer ailments if they're working overtime. And I just wonder when we're trying to target like where to put our resources department by department or to look at safety policies or whatever, if we noticed a trend in claims specifically coming from one or a few departments, maybe that would help us make those decisions. Is there a way similar to the question around utilization data that you could provide that?
We can see what Anthem can do there. My guess is it's going to be a similar answer to pay ranges, is that we would have to cross-reference the utilization data with what department codes are coming over and match those employees up. So that's something that we can check on with the HR team and see if that can be done.
I'm hoping that we can use the data that they're giving us to know that our insurance premiums are too high for the pay that we have. I really don't want staff to get into people's personnel files and aligning what they're going for medical treatment for with their job and their position in their department. I think we're on a thin line with HEPA there and asking staff to look into whose claims are in what department and stuff. And we can look at things that are work-related, workman's comp plans, but I really don't think that we should be diving into people's personal medical stuff. And I agree that we should have it to where we don't have too high of premiums. We're giving raises, but the premiums for our staff is a challenge, and they're not realizing their raises. But I really would like us to stay away from people's personal information with their medical information and where they work and who they work for, which departments. I'm hoping we can stay away
I guess I want to be clear. I'm not looking for personal information here at all. I'm just recognizing that certain jobs have higher cancer risks, certain jobs have higher injury risks, and as an employer with a diverse array of departments and positions, I'm not assuming there's a pattern there, although I've heard different employees at different times assert, and there's certainly national data to back up. Like, for example, firefighters have a much higher risk of cancer, and if we learned by having this data that a lot of these claims were coming from the fire department, then we might realize that there was something to a need for that department specifically. But without assuming that it's any given department or any given type of ailment, maybe data like that would be helpful. So.
Well, I know the consultants have reviewed it. Did you note any particular?
So, I mean, generally speaking, unfortunately, when you have, for instance, call it 12 members over $200,000 to spend, that's just chance. It's spread out, all over the place, most likely. It's not to say you couldn't have, a specific injury related to firemen or whatever, but generally speaking, at the large claim level, they're cancer claims that, maybe you couldn't have done much about. They're sometimes hereditary, which we have a case of those. So it's hard to say they're tied to a specific department, and I think we could probably see if we can get to some level. I understand the concern of getting too detailed, right? So if a department has 2 people in it, that's going to tell you who those folks are. But if we could maybe look at, larger departments and just see a trend, or if there's an issue that we can address, from a safety standpoint or whatever.
Speaking to the 2-person department phenomenon, I think
Yeah.
we could pick our 10 largest departments, and then the rest could just be other departments,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
If you want to know specifically about the fire department, that's one thing. We do have 41 different offices, departments, and that's a lot of work to go through. So if the intent is to just figure out what's going on in the fire department, we can do that.
I guess the 2 that come to mind for me, but I don't want to pretend like I know this comprehensively, would be cancer in the firefighters department, in the fire department, and musculoskeletal injuries in departments that have a lot of manual laborers like TPW.
And I think,
or PUD. So.
Well, as it relates to our premiums, we can do that with the consultants. Tonight's about the benefits package. So if we were to do that, is the follow-on that there would be targeted strategies for certain employees, or where do you think this goes?
And not everybody's on our insurance program either. Right. So you can get the data, but it may not really tell you what you want what you want to know.
What do you want to know?
I just want to finish the presentation and see where
Well,
we're going.
I just want to mention to y'all that there's Georgia law that requires us to carry firefighter cancer insurance. And so we pay for that because there's an established risk associated with that job that we know about. So.
Okay, well, we're going to go back to the benefits package.
and just real quickly, too, keep in mind you do cover dependents. So you have, call it 1,300 folks in your plan that are employees, and there's another probably roughly 1,300 that are just dependents that you have really no control over their job. So in terms of strategic opportunities, we've worked with the HR team over here the last really couple of years on trying to identify things that enhance the plan, things that save money. Oftentimes, they may cost money. The first item on here is one I've already heard a little bit tonight. When we look at your plan design, you do offer a pretty good benefits package. You offer a couple of different plan designs that meet employees where they need or where they're at. A couple HSAs, a POS plan, which is very common in the marketplace. One of the things that we've noticed as we've analyzed your design to benchmarks is the actual cost for those employees to participate in the plan, the contribution they pay. So we've done a couple analysis on here that just says, well, what if we were to get our contributions to a benchmark level? We were to get to a benchmark level, and that's our goal. Not saying that's the recommendation, but just what if that was the goal or the thought. If we do that, we would always probably generally recommend, given the size of the spend on contributions, is to get there over a few years. So we've looked at 2 scenarios here, which is getting to benchmarks over 3 years and 1 over 5. Just because of trend and whatnot, obviously it costs more money to get there over 5. But in theory, you're reducing in contributions oftentimes, or in instances where you would have had increased contributions because your overall rates went up, you held them. And so because of that, you will take on additional cost, of course. So over 3 years, that's about $2.6 million, and 5 years is about $2.88 million. That would get you at a benchmark level for contributions, and very similar plan designs to what we see in the marketplace as well. We've looked at plan design enhancements. So in your POS plan, we looked at analysis that would reduce the deductible in that plan, as well as changing the PT, chiro, and acupuncture copays. Those copays don't have a material impact into the cost. It's negligible. The actual cost comes with reducing the deductible, and that's about a $300,000 cost shift. There's additional details in the appendix that'll show you the design that we modeled there. We're also making sure that we're putting the best networks forward for your employees to access care. Anthem is a great provider for you all. You have great in-network utilization and discounts. We have looked at using what's called a high-performance network. High-performance network just means that, think of it as if the best doctors who have the best discounts and the best care, if your employees were to use those. Unfortunately, you only have about 12% of your membership that lives in one of these networks or one of these areas. So getting a member to use that requires some sort of incentive typically. And so even if we can incent those members to utilize that network, and given there's not that many of them in one of those networks, the savings for that is not too great. It's about $45,000, somewhere around there. And then the other one on here is we've looked at a preferred hospital system in Athens. So obviously you have St. Mary's and Athens Regional or Piedmont, and there's different discounts that these hospitals have with Anthem and Blue Cross of Georgia. What we believe is that there is one particular hospital with a slight advantage on inpatient hospital services. And so there could be some savings, decent savings, to steer members towards a particular hospital. That requires a good bit of a communication campaign to do that. And I have TBD here because you need to incent them to do that. So you'd often reduce their cost share if they go to one hospital over the other. And so we'd have to kind of get an idea of, one, if this is an appetite that you all want to do and what that incentive would be.
Let's do it.
Well, hang on a second, no, because that could create some questions.
Yes.
And it'd be nice if we can incentivize or do something with both hospitals. To be both be preferred in some form or fashion.
Yeah. And, and so when, an example, I'll use a very basic example here. Let's say, and this is I'm just using relative terms here, but one hospital gets a 50% discount and the other hospital has a 60% discount with a particular procedure. You would incent that member to go to the hospital with the higher discount.
Oh, I get what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But I also get some of the questions that may arise from it.
So we have continued to look at this with the HR team. One of the follow-ups from this, if there was interest in it, is we can work with Anthem on getting a little more detail on what the incentive would look like and how much they think it would drive folks over to a particular hospital. But like I said, too, this is a pretty big communication campaign that would have to be laid out to employees, almost to explain to them, why one hospital is preferred for particular procedures or whatnot. The next item on here is on-site clinic. So we've done a clinic feasibility analysis, and we've looked at a few different things here. The first is a clinic build-out. So if space exists today, there's about a $95,000 cost for equipment, furniture, and everything like that to build out a clinic. We also looked at what it would cost to rent, and got some metrics internally of, call it $18 to $26 per square foot. Even found a particular place in the area that was around $18,000 per year to rent that out. That's the cost of the facility itself. The ongoing annual cost, and what you'd have to do is you have an administrator that helps you run the program, run the clinic itself, and that's about $600,000 to do that. Just a couple things to keep in mind, considerations here. We do see a number of your peer groups, counties around the area, municipalities, that do have similar clinics, especially large organizations with a concentrated workforce. We'll see that fairly often. So that would put you a little bit in line with what we're seeing in the marketplace. And then also it can be viewed as an enhanced benefit package. So your employees will now have a place perhaps near their work where they can seek care. And in general, we do see clinics, while they don't provide an ROI immediately, by year 3, we do see some sort of ROI begin to materialize. One other consideration, or a couple other considerations to keep in mind, is There is a significant time commitment when it comes to implementing one of these. The ongoing oversight and management, communication to employees about how these facilities work does require a good bit of work, likely 100 to 400 additional staff hours a year or an additional one HR team member to be solely dedicated to working the clinic. Given the cost that we looked at, the build out, the ongoing cost, the implementation, and from what our experience has shown, we're seeing an ROI that would begin to materialize in year 3 of about 1.5 to 1. So this is not typically something that is a big, windfall of cash, but it does save money over time, and it's obviously an enhanced benefit and can be viewed very positively from your employee base. Any questions on that one? We did see, obviously, on the earlier slide from Anthem that musculoskeletal was a condition that's driving a large cost. We asked Anthem about what solutions are available in the marketplace, and they have a program called SWORD. Long story short, it's basically a digital physical healthcare platform. Think of it as an ability to do physical therapy from the comfort of your own home on an app. So as you've heard of telemedicine and people can converse with doctors via FaceTime, it's very similar to that. What we see is that you generally get pretty good compliance, especially these sort of tools are great for workforces that have odd hours. Police force is something that would come to mind. And people can do them from the comfort of their own home. There is a fee associated with this, and we've included that in our estimate of the savings here and a relatively conservative utilization of this program. And a lot of the savings comes from the fact that members, one, may avoid surgery, or that any physical therapy that is done via this tool is cheaper than in-person physical therapy, just as it's cheaper to do telehealth as opposed to an in-person physician visit. So it's a roughly $300,000 savings. A few more items here. Pharmacy RFP. This is being very close to being released. As our recommendation, you do an RFP like this about every 3 years. So you all are due for a pharmacy RFP. Anthem is your pharmacy administrator. You're called what's carved in right now. We will be looking at obviously giving Anthem a chance to bid on this, but other vendors outside of a carved in approach, where you have a vendor who all they do is administer your prescription drug program. I've used a very, very conservative estimate of $150,000 here. I'd like to think it's going to be a good bit greater than that, but just because it hasn't been released yet, we've used a conservative estimate. Hope is over the next few months here, we'll have some concrete numbers to share with you. Another item we've looked at with the team is disease, chronic condition management, and advocacy. So I showed on the previous slide, or a couple slides ago, that Anthem was engaged with your members. Generally, this type of solution is for organizations who don't have great engagement. And what this means is that Anthem would no longer be the 1-800 number that your folks call when they need, when they have a question, when they need disease or chronic condition management, or they're trying to figure out a claim. They would call a company, and I'm using 2 companies here as examples, Quantum and Accolade, which are companies in the marketplace, that all they do are these things. There are some savings associated with their management of the program, but a good bit of the savings comes from their expanded prior authorization list. So with Anthem, if you have a knee surgery, for instance, today your doctor will call in to Anthem to get that surgery pre-certified. Those sort of lists right now are managed by Anthem. Under this scenario, they'd be managed by one of those organizations who typically has a longer list. This just means your employees are having to jump through a few more hoops to get things done that they need to get done. Because of that, though, there are savings associated with that. So if this was something that you all wanted to go down the route of, we would definitely recommend further analysis. But generally speaking, after a fee associated with paying an administrator like this, there's roughly a $200,000 savings. Couple more items on here, moving the medical and pharmacy plan to fully insured. Some pros to this, so you're self-funded right now. Your claims fluctuate from month to month. Under a fully insured approach, you pay a fixed premium, and that premium does not change unless enrollment changes. So that's obviously much more stable from month to month. The cons to moving to a fully insured arrangement are taxes tend to need to be paid. Obviously, the insurance company now holds all the risk, so they put additional load into margin. Administrative costs are built into their premium, which gets passed on to you. And then you have less flexibility with plan design and program elements. So talking about carving the pharmacy out, you could not do that under a fully insured arrangement. You're tied to that carrier. Generally speaking, because of the margin, the taxes, additional administrative costs built into going fully insured, it's about a 3 to 4% increase in cost. So for the purpose of this, it's about $725,000 or $1.2 million a year to move to a fully insured environment. Another item we've looked at is joining a health insurance pool. So this needs a good bit more analysis if it's something that you all want to consider. But what we generally would see here is a cost increase to do that. Athens-Clarke County is a fairly large municipality, and joining a pool of similar organizations, for instance, you would probably be one of the larger organizations in it. So you may see some sort of cost increase as you absorb the cost of other smaller organizations. And then I just wanted to add, too, that if you partner with another employer, for instance, it can be you can create what's called a MIWA, a multiple employer welfare arrangement. And MIWAs are very unique. Many employers try to avoid becoming a MIWA because there's a number of state and federal regulations that would apply at that point in time. So just wanted to mention that as well. And then a couple more items to finish out here, and then I promise I'm done. Paid leave program options. We've looked at expanding the leave program that Athens-Clarke County currently has. So many municipalities have expanded the family leave coverage for birth, adoption, family caregiving, to allow for folks to take off more time to care for those things. Generally, what you're asking an employer to do is to have a medically certified proof that they're taking care of something like this. We have a full recommendation in the appendix in slide 20, but essentially it allows for 100% of paid leave for everything from childbirth to caring for a particular family member or oftentimes even a close friend. You have to provide proof of that sort of information to HR, but that's becoming a little bit more common. So we're starting to see that and think it may be something you all want to consider. And then finally on here is lifestyle spending accounts. So for instance, you have health savings accounts and flexible spending accounts today. This is a little bit different. This is a taxable account, but what you would do is offer it either in addition to or in lieu of funding, for instance, a health savings account. It allows that employee to go buy anything from groceries to a TV, but it's a taxable account that you can fund on their behalf. And we're starting to see them pick up a little bit more steam in the marketplace. And so just something that we wanted you to make aware of. Obviously, the cost associated with that is completely dependent upon how much you wanted to fund if it was something that you wanted to do. And I believe that is all that I had. Any questions?
I have just a comment. I like the fact that we seem to be looking at lowering the premiums or lessening the employee contribution back towards the benchmark, which I think is helpful. I know it's hard to do with rising healthcare costs and such, but I think that's a good goal for us to have for the 5-year period, 3 to 5 year period, and from that standpoint. But I also saw in your plans, one of the plan modeling, I guess, that it was one of the appendix that your the copay for a specialist is going to be reduced to $30, and the out-of-pocket in-network seems like we're saving a little bit of money there for the employees.
Yep.
with the new plan
Yep.
coming forward.
Yep, and those were just
So that'll help. I mean,
just examples of things that we can do. So you don't have to fully reduce that specialist copay, but
Yeah.
that's just was a particular one we modeled.
yeah, because that that out-of-pocket deductible that kind of adds up and sneaks up on you.
Oh, yeah.
If you don't watch it. So, yeah.
Is-
And one procedure could wipe it all out. So.
Carol?
Yeah, the joining the health insurance pool item, we went over in our last presentation about some environmental concerns that have come up again and again, and that was really helpful to me in understanding this. I find myself needing to understand why being part of like the ACCG insurance group health benefit wouldn't be, or wanting to know what the cost comparison would be. I was looking at that just recently, and there's about, 60 counties or in there, but including Macon Bibb and Chatham County. And I was wondering how we could go about finding that out, so I would know it's in a better deal for us. If that's easy to find out, difficult, but I know that health insurance, the costs are a big, they're a big burden on a lot of our employees.
Sure.
So I want to make sure that we're not missing out on something that would be to their benefit.
Absolutely. Well,
And
we-
that I know that I can explain that as well, that what we're offering is the best.
Understood. Yeah, we can work with Jeff and the team on that.
Okay.
Commissioner Hall?
Yeah, I wanted to go back to what I was trying to ask about before, and, Stephen, I appreciate this presentation, and I want to acknowledge that maybe you're not the consultant to ask for this, maybe this wasn't the presentation that staff thinks is appropriate to dig into this, but when I was going through this presentation, I was really struck by the 33% increase in musculoskeletal claims and the 43% increase in cancer. And when I see numbers like that, I think, man, we should really try to figure out why that's happening. And I feel like this presentation is largely about, well, how do we reduce the costs of claims? But I'm trying to think of this from the perspective of prevention, and how do we reduce the number of claims we're getting? So the idea I had was for us to maybe look for data by department in case that would help us identify a pattern. I'm not attached to that idea, but I would like us to consider that this spike in percentage of claims around these types of claims is concerning data-wise. And I don't know whether that's because we have an above-average age in our workforce. I don't know if that's because we have people working lots of overtime. I don't know if we have some kind of working conditions somewhere or some yet-to-be-identified issue like they had at the landfill and people are, I don't know, But I feel like we can't know answers to questions we haven't been asking. And I think we need to be asking a question and finding data in response to a question of why are these claims going up? And then think of solutions that aren't just reducing the costs for claims, but reducing the number of claims by figuring out, if we can, why people have them. So that's what I was getting at, and I welcome any insight staff or colleagues can offer on how we best go about that. Not attached to my idea, but I do feel like it's important for us to do sooner than later, because that's a very concerning statistic for me.
Is that a question about the, no, I get it. So, and I agree with you. I think that we need to get to the root cause. And what I do think that, I don't know if we could ask staff, because it's a little different from what the presentation is. So are you asking staff to look into that
If I could summarize my question in a concise way, it would be, we're seeing an increase in cancer claims and an increase in musculoskeletal claims, and I would like us to think about how we can reduce the incidences of those illnesses that people are experiencing, rather than just taking for granted, like, oh, cancer's going up in ACC Gov, so let's find a way to lower the amount it costs to have cancer. I'd like for us to think about, well, is there any kind of data we can collect that would help us lower the number of people getting cancer?
Again, I'm asking, is this a directive to staff to look into that?
Well, I appreciate you qualifying, okay? And I do think it's relevant to what we're talking about tonight, but you've made two different requests, and giving you all a bunch of health data, to Commissioner Wright's point, I'm concerned about. If you're asking for staff to try and tease out any thematic experience there, I think that's something we can probably do.
And these numbers, though, represent dependents that are also on our plan. They're not all just employees.
But yeah, that's what he's saying, but he's being really specific.
No, it's not, Ovita, because he's asking, he's assuming all of these are employees, but they're not. They're
I'm not assuming, I'm saying I don't know until someone gives me data that clarifies who it is. I don't see why that's so weird to figure out, y'all.
I think
It's not
we should
weird.
look into this.
Yeah, right. And Jeff, do you want to add anything?
I would say, part of, we don't just do benefits on April 11th. So we have a wellness team. Part of being a self-funded plan is getting this data throughout the year and at the end of the year. And we program specifically against it all year long, every day of the year. Certainly, there's workers' comp data that we could look at. And I would say that some of this is related to risk management, where there's the opportunity for safety and risk to plug in to these sorts of things with departments, with training. And I think the musculoskeletal program, which I've seen, is pretty impressive. It knocks down barriers to care. And I think I'm not going to say it's a no-brainer, but it's a pretty strong idea. And so there are things that we're doing to program against the data, and I'll stop there.
Well, let me also add on to that, and this point was made earlier. This was the case in the last county that I managed that, almost a third of the costs were due to a very small handful of folks. And what happens there is you have episodic things that happen for various reasons, but where I think real exposure for both the employee's health and the employer are chronic conditions that are allowed to progress and become worse. And I think the statement was made that we have a good handle on what those chronic conditions are, who they are, trying to engage them. That's one of the best things I think you can do to cut down on the high-cost claimants. So just know, in addition to what Jeff mentioned, that is a part of our practice.
Could I go here first since you've spoken? Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I mean, from what I understand, there's kind of a trend across the board post-COVID where people had put off the kind of screenings and the kind of procedures and that, such as, knee replacements or a routine cancer screening. And those things have just now recently been caught. So there might be a pandemic-related reason why we see this spike in 2022. So it'd be interesting to look at the specific data for 2020, 2021, 2022, but that could be, I know I personally put off some procedures during the pandemic.
And when our actuaries are developing your budget, they account for that. So they assume people delayed care and therefore are going to have worse conditions later on.
Commissioner Davenport and then Commissioner Myers.
Quick question about the on-site clinic. For the peer groups, were they 24-hour or like 9 to 5?
I'm not sure of that, Typically 9 to 5. They're not generally 24 hours from what I'm aware of.
Commissioner Myers.
Yeah, this may be a question for the manager. In terms of the leave discussion, the paid leave or the recommendation in here, what are our next steps for making that happen?
Well, these are a variety of potential solutions that can be taken, some or all, and I appreciate that's one thing that we press because y'all always ask us, what are some alternatives that we can do? Typically at this point, if there is a general consensus around one or several of those, then we can take it to the next step of analysis and share with you what, in your budget deliberations, what you would need to set aside and what the ensuing process might be around that. For something like that wouldn't happen immediately on July 1st, but obviously we'd have to work through that. So I encourage y'all to either tonight or in the next few days, just to let us know which of those resonated with you that we need to look at. Kind of tally that up. I'll share it back with y'all. And for those that there seems to be consensus around, to go ahead and have our staff work on it, pay the consultants to do the next cut. We want to make sure that most of the commissioners are interested in that.
Well, I sure hope my colleagues will be interested in that family leave planning.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I as Commissioner Hull brought up earlier, I would be interested in exploring some kind of program that had a tiered monthly payment based on salary levels. I once upon a time worked for an entity that did that, and it's one thing for someone who's making $30,000 a year to pay a monthly premium of a couple $100 versus someone who's making $80,000 a year, and, you know, people are really struggling, and I would say putting off healthcare because of that, or not opting into the plan. So I would like to see us explore that.
Commissioner Davenport?
Yes, I'm interested in on-site clinic, I think, but 9 to 5, because we have departments that work, you know, unfortunately, until like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, or 12-hour shifts, 10 to 12-hour shifts, but just to look into the on-site clinic.
Yep.
Any other thoughts, questions? Commissioner Wright, did I see your hand earlier? No? Right. No?
And I know on the next slide, we're going to talk about employee contributions, but can I just go ahead and say something?
Yeah.
So just for all of us to think about when it comes to employee contributions, one of the things that keeps employees employed, is our health benefit package. And the more that they pay into it is going to discourage them to stay or to apply. So that's up for discussion. I would like for the county to pay more into the for our medical service, but that's just me.
Commissioner?
Mayor Pro Tem, just as we go through the points. So with that, we did ask, and they provided sort of a 3 or 5 year plan. I can share those sensitivities with you if you're interested in pursuing that. You can take that up during the budget discussions, and you can add that in there, and that gives us some direction on which way you want to go.
Commissioner Culpepper?
This might have to do with retention when we're talking about the compensation, but, you know, possibly looking at increasing coverage with tenure. Possibly increasing, you know, the amount of that the county covers versus the employee based on years of service, and also increasing day, you know, PTO. And I don't know if we do that right now.
I don't either.
So PTO, I'm not aware of.
We don't do anything related to longevity here. You know, the longer you're here, the more you make, or the longer you're here, the less you pay. That's not currently a function of our system, our compensation benefit system.
Okay. Okay. Are we good? Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're going to ask Mr. Hale to come back and talk about the compensation strategy.
Sir? Should be. Government issue. So I thought, I didn't want to jam it in there.
Well, while we're transitioning, Josh reminded me that Commissioner Culpepper, so there is a function where the longer you serve, the more leave you do get incrementally. So if you're here over so many years, and I can share that with you, so.
That's part of our compensation plan.
Right now, yes, sir. Sorry, I was mistaken.
Not related to the future.
Don't believe so.
When we both entered our 40s, we was like, oh my God, you did it. Thank God we did it. You did it. Had cancer.
When did it happen? I saw it yesterday. Oh, I know, I saw it yesterday. And you know what? They don't want to do it.
She was 48.
They'll scream about him 2 weeks.
It's half my paycheck. I need you a paycheck. There's the return. I couldn't. But so what happens?
Yeah, it's the third month.
Better.
Do you want it full screen?
Sure.
Full screen is a PDF.
I can pull it up. Here, it's down here. I can pull it up. Thanks, sir.
County, I think it's more than, just for regular visits, so.
I think we're ready.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Hale,
Yes, ma'am.
it's all on you. It's on Mr. Hale, y'all.
It's all on us.
We were over here talking too.
It's all on us. Hey, good evening. Talk to you a little bit about what our recommendations are for pay. Of course, when we look at benefits, rates, and costs, those are based on actuarial projections and all kinds of data that Stephen shared with you. When we look at pay, we don't look at what benefits cost, but we also understand, practically speaking, as you've mentioned, when we're an employee, we certainly see those things being related. And so with that, I'm going to talk to you about what the recommendations are and what the tools you have in your toolkit for increasing pay might look like in the coming budget. So our standard purpose slide, we'll talk about kind of what's going on in the environment, which hasn't changed a whole lot of late. A little bit of context for those of you who are new about what we did last year. And then just a quick update. I don't have department level turnover data because we're eyeball deep in a conversion of systems right now, and that wasn't available. I can tell you that our turnover has not appreciably decreased. We're in that 16 to 17% sort of range. We are seeing some additional hiring movement, which is a good sign. So hopefully we will be able to make up some ground as things change. And then we'll talk about pay recommendations. So with that, you've seen these slides. I don't think there's a lot to go over here, but I just wanted to remind you that last year we made a great commitment to meeting the needs of our employees in pay with the 7% across the board increase for our unified plan, which is non-public safety employees. We gave them a 2% pay for performance opportunity, and then we also moved the pay structure, the plan salaries up to stay competitive by 4%. So at the time in 23, I was thinking in terms of a 2-year approach to compensation, knowing that we probably were going to fall behind again as inflation continued to grab hold, and that is certainly the case. On the public safety pay plan side, a 6% table increase, that hits every step salary, so every employee on a step gets that increase. We also funded a service crediting program, which hopefully has or seems to be helping us with recruitment in some areas with experienced law enforcement in particular. And then you all asked us to take a look at the sheriff's office and peer agencies, which we have done and presented and are about to implement with, in tandem with the go live of Munis. The sheriff's office will realize those increases. Should you decide to do any additional table increase for the public safety pay plan for FY24 effective in July, sheriff's office will also get that as well. So we are catching them up based on time and then catching them up again in July if that's approved. You also implemented a pay floor or a minimum wage of $15.60. We implemented that, and we were able to create some space in the pay ranges for that. There is some compression that resulted. We do not know the scope and cost of addressing that, because as we artificially raised some people's pay, we didn't necessarily raise the pay ranges up to $15.60. So our bottom pay ranges are below that, but no one makes less than $15.60. And I can show you a slide later on that relationship if you like. So that is this time last year what we did, and thank you for that. In terms of what's happening right now, I'm sure you're well aware of these things. There is a long-term labor shortage that is demographic that we've been predicting for a decade, that is here to stay for a while. And then we also have a pretty historically low unemployment rate, both nationally and in Georgia. Full employment is 4 or 5% unemployment. That's a healthy amount of unemployment that allows for people to move, change jobs. We're starting to see in national survey and from the literature that the Great Recession is yielding regrets. The grass is not always greener, and about 80% of people who had resigned their positions are reporting that they have regrets on doing that. And we start to see some return from that here and as other employers do. Again, inflation is softening some, but we're still in that gray area of whether we'll see additional Fed rate hikes, whether that will finally bring the recession on, or how soft that landing might be. And so it's a bit of a tenuous time where we're sort of waiting for something to change. In the meantime, as you know, all of our jobs are posted continuously because there just aren't a lot of eligible people out there applying for our jobs or anyone else's. And so they're able to seek higher wages, more flexible leave options, and workplace flexibility. I'll say to you that every article I read from SHRM or IPMA or GMA lists the things we ought to be doing to combat this, and we're doing some form of all of these things for the most part, inclusive of the benefits discussion that you're having. Again, these are unemployment costs, or excuse me, rates fairly recently. The Employer Cost Index we've talked about before. That's the cost of employment, and that is typically where we look for a reference point as to how big of an across-the-board raise we might offer people. There are some other things that are headwinds or considerations that I'm sure you have in mind. Our pension liability is increasing and rapidly so, in part due to a very bad year in returns in the stock market, in part to a lower discount rate, in part to the fact that we have increasing obligations with a growing retiree population. So we are in the midst of some design work to help with sustainability of the pension. But that, without doing anything, those costs will go from an annual contribution that's in the neighborhood of 12 as high as 16, 17 million over the next several years if we do nothing. So that's a topic that, as we look at pay and benefits and retirement, we can't look at them in silos. We have to be able to consider all the things we want our employees to have. There's an impact on increased pay that goes beyond just that salary increase, but it also hits our pension liability and pay-based benefits. We also need to think about the sustainability of our levels of pay when there's the inevitable downturn, and our ability to carry the current employee salary obligation, positions, avoid pay cuts, furloughs, and reduction in force, which are things that people come to the public sector to avoid. And so that tension between providing pay that is competitive and that is sustainable when things aren't great. So with that, on our unified plan, again, our civilian workforce, there are some factors that you're used to seeing by now, by which a 1% market increase, which is an across-the-board raise that everyone would enjoy, 1% performance increase, and then 1% to the table. Those are the factors that we work with. And what we want to do is juggle those balls across time. You want to do them all, and you want to do them in a coordinated way. So for example, if you raise the table as recommended by 2%, you want to give a market raise that's above that number so that people don't lose ground and newer employees don't catch up with our current employees, so that people are moving through their range. We provide a performance increase. So these are numbers that are considered in tandem with last year's increases to help maintain our competitive position. This would be, in my view, as you see up there, a minimum maintenance set of increases. Public safety, different type of plan. You can see 1% on the step table. We're recommending 3%. We also want to look at the two plans together to make sure we're doing comparable investment in both plans. And then our step increases, which is something that's built into the design of the plan. We also have that 400,000 or so, I think it's 395 maybe, which is the result of the sheriff's office adjustments that are coming up. That's the annualized figure in the coming year.
So for the sheriff's office, is 3 plus 4 or just 4?
If you were to approve, the 4 is already baked in and going to be delivered. If you were to approve the 3% increase for the public safety step plan, all agencies in the plan would realize that increase, yes. So it's in an additional, and it's time-based. So we did a market study. We found we were off the market a little bit, and so we adjust in time, and then time goes by in July. By July, we would say we want to continue to keep all the agencies in step, but not have the sheriff's office turn around and lose that ground they just gained. Yes?
Do these reflect what is in the manager's budget that's now in the mayor's hands?
Yes.
Thank you.
So there's the simple totals and just some information on some of those considerations I mentioned earlier that will require some investment and will be part of your budget.
On your recruitment end, I know you say you read a lot of articles and stuff. Have we looked at possibly targeting our retirees that have retired, bringing them back in some capacity, part-time?
We do offer that, and we'll see retirees after about a month transition to the retiree payroll, and then we'll bring them back if there's mutual interest at the hourly rate they left at.
Right. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we encourage that. We see that sometimes in the reserve programs with police and sheriff, but yeah, we definitely love to have that institutional knowledge back.
Okay.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Hall.
Back to slide 7 with the minimum maintenance that you referred to, Jeff.
Yes, sir.
Are those percents what you would think of as a minimum in any given year as like a best practice, or is that because of the high inflation, this is a minimum and in other years it would be
No,
bigger?
I would consider that in a normal year to be what you would, those are ranges that, whatever a normal year means anymore, I think pre-COVID is what I'm thinking about. Yes.
Okay.
I've got some, Mayor Pro Tem. So you mentioned normal year, and obviously things aren't normal for us as we're trying to, I mean, when I say that, I'm talking about when we're trying to hire people. And I know at the retreat we had mentioned about 20% vacancy rate or something of that effect.
16, 17.
16, 17%. So roughly almost 200, 300 employees that we're having difficulty hiring for. And I'm not sure what positions those may be, but I guess I'm going back to the other slide that looks at, making sure we or being able to provide the services to people in our community. And, one of the things I think about when we talk or we turn in a work order for right-of-way cutting grass or something like that, I mean, are there some positions that we can look at that we just may not, it'll be a while before it gets back to where we can hire them. And there may be some positions, and I think I brought this up at the retreat, and you may have sent the list of vacancies that have been vacant for the past 2 years or so. And it may just be a situation where we may not need those positions anymore if they've been vacant for 2 or more years, because obviously people have been doing the work without them. And in that regard,
Maybe. I'm not sure I would make that. I mean, I think you're spreading.
Where I'm going, Jeff, is that at some point, we're going to have to start thinking about how this new economy is working with a workforce that's not available to us, and what we need to do. And we can always go so much and raise money or raise salaries, which we're doing, but we could also work with a smaller workforce and pay people more and help and raise the salaries that way too. Or we could also look at, like, the right-of-way, for example, contracting with private companies, private landscapers to go and do the right-of-ways for us and when needed, or leaf and limb or stuff like that. I just don't think we ought to shut the door on those opportunities and start thinking in those terms, so that the citizens we represent don't get a less service as a result of the difficulties everybody's having in hiring.
Those are good points, and certainly we could look at, where we needed to, trying to get some private assistance on making sure that service delivery, and I do want to credit staff, and we're experiencing burnout like a lot of folks, because they're trying to sustain the volume of work that's being required of them. And I heard this statistic today, I haven't vetted it with Jeff, but for instance, while transportation and public works, is almost fully staffed, streets and drainage has a 45% vacancy rate, so they're down half, all right? And so, as an example, I wouldn't necessarily, because there's a lot of great work that they have to do, and I know that there are other departments who are asking for special consideration, but we've got it's across the board. And so with that, if we downsize and eliminate some of these vacant positions, you need to understand that the current pace of the work that's been assigned to them, folks are doing double duty, and they can do that for a temporary time period, but we can't do it for long.
Well, I get you there, but what I'm also suggesting too is, in order to help with that, let's look out into the private sector to see who can help us with that, so that we're not overtaxing the employees that are staying around, but also, I think it's worth exploring how we compensate those employees that are staying around and are putting in them 120% effort, and this gets us going in that direction, but maybe there's something else we need to do at some point in time. So you see where I'm going?
Yeah, I do. I think
I think we just got to start thinking a bit differently about it all.
I think you're right. And I think we've kind of waited for, as Jeff alluded to, normal to come back, and it's not happening. And so, we're doubling down on workforce development and retention, which you're going to hear more about in the near future. So anything's on the table, Commissioner Hamby. I think that's got some merit, that we look at our service delivery, because the residents expect the quality of services that they've become accustomed to, and we need to be able to try and sustain that as much as we can. Yeah. I will say, I do appreciate that we have these presentations on the same night, because it is a package, compensation, benefits, and Commissioner Wright alluded earlier, there's that adage that, you give us a raise, you take it away for health insurance. And so this is definitely a coordinated package that we hope y'all will review and give us some feedback on.
And I got one more question, if you don't mind, Mayor Pro Tem, about the pension. You put up there that there's a credit of $12.6 million, or how much ever is available for us.
That's the annual required contribution.
There's
a credit balance that we.
And what is that credit balance that we?
It's $4 or $5 million right now.
4 or 5 million.
And so there's some room there to
use for that.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And are we doing any of that this year in this year's budget? Or using any of that credit in this year's budget?
I think, was there some, I have to go back and look.
Okay, that's fine.
I think we were taking maybe $1 million, is what I recall.
And Jeff, our past practice has been not to try and take all those credits in one year, but have some certain amount in case the market takes a terrible downturn, that you can use that in the ensuing year. But we don't like carrying around big fund balances either, so we try and spend them down over the years.
Well, just one more question now, Hush. The 12.4 million, in the past, we've sometimes paid a bit more than than the required contribution. So that's not the actual retired contribution, is it? Or is it more than what the required,
You're right. In the past, we have done more.
Right.
I am not certain whether that's the actual, I think that's the actual retired, that's the number.
I don't think we're overpaying this year.
And what I was sharing earlier is that number is projected to start to take off.
Yeah,
and we're very soon coming to you with hopefully with some solutions.
Yeah.
Commissioner Myers.
Yeah, in terms of we're looking at benefits and wages in terms of filling our empty, our empty positions. Do we have information, comparable information on rates of vacancies in other counties as well, and also in other employers in Athens and large, or if there's been a change, in their rates of vacancies?
I will tell you that public sector hiring in general is struggling, and that's a national problem, and specifically local government, it's very difficult because as you're contemplating, some of the traditional trade-offs between private and public are eroding because of the cost of healthcare, because of lack of stability of jobs as they get cut and that kind of thing. And so we are moving in a direction where certainly we do everything we can with the resources we have in your direction in these programs, but I know that there are other initiatives through organizational development, through the manager's office, that seek to make sure that we have the very best culture that we can have. And so people will forego additional salary if they work in a place that they love and that they believe in the purpose of the organization. And we believe that's kind of the people that we have. How do we keep them? How do we incentivize them to self-select to us? And that's in part getting out there and doing a better job of saying why this is such a great place to work and live in a branded way. And part of that is, who are we from the standpoint of the value proposition across these buckets of total compensation that we offer? And that's where we're trying to get.
Commissioner Hall.
Are we at some point going to get like a presentation on staff's plan for these chronically vacant positions that we're talking about that, I think we've heard time and again, you don't want to assume we can't fill? The streets and drainage team. I know we've had some chronic vacancies in the police department is another one. There's a grant specialist position I think we've been struggling to hire forever. Does staff have strategies for how to fill these positions in a targeted way that somehow meets the standards of equitability across the organization, and or to reward the people who are sticking around, as Commissioner Hamby was pointing out, with a one-time bonus or something for working so much overtime 2 years in a row or something? I'm just wondering, I feel like this has come up a few times in a row, but I haven't really heard a specific proposal on what can we do to fill these chronically vacant positions? Well,
you might note, and I'll defer to Jeff too, the slide he showed where here's things that others, GMA, are saying you should be working on, and we're working on all those things. But Jeff also said something very important, that, what can we do to create a work environment that people want to be a part of, right? And so that is going to get a lot more attention, I think. I mentioned to y'all, our staff has applied for an opportunity through Harvard Bloomberg, and we're hopeful to be given a 2-year term for one of their folks to come down, and they pay for it all, and their focus is going to be workforce retention and recruitment. So there's more to come on that. With pay, I just point this out, so the raise is rewarding existing employees. And the pay table which is going to elevate those minimums to where future folks will get more money. So those are the two kind of dynamics with the pay aspect. Jeff, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, I would agree with all of that, and I can't fix inflation and unemployment. There are things that are at work that are just outside of our control in terms of filling positions. Certainly we're working on the presentation of our jobs in the marketplace to appeal to people by having people tell stories of why they're here and what they love about being here. But there's a reason why this is unprecedented, and it in some respects is cyclical, and in some respects is going to be a little bit more persistent. But I don't have that solution. I just know that we're trying many things.
I appreciate that. I think what I was trying to get at is, are any of the things that we're trying like a targeted approach for certain positions or departments where we're noticing chronic vacancies? Because I think what I'm hearing is a lot of across the board, we know we need to address pay and healthcare and everything, but is there streets and drainage specifically, we just can't fill these positions and we keep losing more? Do we need to do something for them the same way we did a study for attorney?
Yes, sir. So we do have incentive pay in place. You do have a classification system that limits the ability to do those sorts of things without doing more across-the-board things. If, as is, I believe in the budget, a potential pay study, there are things we can do with the job architecture, with the structure of our jobs that could allow us a little more flexibility. But you're talking about a wholesale structural change in the way we pay people. It can be done, but it's a big, heavy lift, and it would require time and money and resources that, we're certainly willing to explore.
I was acknowledging Commissioner Link's arm that she was holding for so long, and then we're holding it with the other hand. So it's on you.
Yeah, I just can't help but wonder if there isn't some youth development opportunity in some of these positions, especially some of these entry-level positions, bringing some older teens in, or even young 20-somethings in. We have issues with, some of these kids needing something to do to keep them out of trouble, and $15 an hour is a lot of money to a teenager, I would hope. And, we see great success in programs like the Young Urban Builders, which is fulfilling a need in the community while also training teens in some high skills.
The police cadet program.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of, 20-hour-a-week positions for teens in targeted communities.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Myers.
Yeah, quick question. On some of the positions that we have that have been empty for a while, that have, larger salaries, like the environmental engineer position, I'm not sure how long that's been empty. That's been a while, hasn't it? What kind of targeted job posting do we do in professional organizations and professional job posting sites?
So we definitely rely on the departments to help us identify what are the associations, professional associations where people who work with you look for jobs, and we will go there and spend their funds on advertising on those sites. We certainly do. Our platform, applicant tracking platform, is linked to governmentjobs.com. So every one of the hundreds of municipalities and agencies in the country that use that platform, when you log in, they see our jobs alongside theirs.
So with the environmental engineer job, would there be specific engineering platforms that we've posted?
Yeah, and I think the problem with some positions like that are highly technical, for example, an engineer that needs PE, attorneys, mechanics, skilled trades, CDL drivers. These are the positions that are chronically difficult, even in good times, for us to fill. And as Commissioner Hamby points out, you have to make strategic decisions about whether you You buy the talent, you grow the talent, or you rent the talent. Those are the sort of options. And so I know that a lot of our directors, HR included, at a certain point, we get to a place where we say, this doesn't make sense anymore for us to do in-house for any number of reasons. So I know that in Public Works, they contract out on-call engineering services, for example. We've had to make adjustments in how we, in our job requirements and cede the fact that we may not be able to afford certain skill sets. And so we have to find it in some other way. In central services, we're seeking to grow mechanics through opportunities within pay grade for in-grade advancement. That way we can get a young teen or somebody with some aptitude and interest who comes in, gets paid at the minimal rate. If they stay and they gain certain skill sets, they get a different title, but they get a bump without somebody having to retire or leave. And they can work their way up to the point where they're a full-blown electrician or mechanic. So we're looking at all kinds of ways to give people pathways in. But right now is just a moment that every employer and everywhere, it's very difficult to find qualified, suitable folks.
Any other thoughts? Okay. Jeff, were you?
Thanks, Jeff. Sir.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
Okay. It is.
Can we take a break?
Taking a break. It is 8:30. We're a little late. How many minutes y'all want?
5 minutes.
5? Good.
Oh.
Good. wrap up with the report from Dr. S. on the Human Relations Commission, and I'll turn it over to you, madam.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
It is so nice to be here and see everyone. Again, my name is Dr. Remy Ebbs. I am the new inclusion officer here with Athens-Clarke County. So this is my very first time in front of you all, so it's great for you all to be here and be able to introduce the Human Relations, the HRC 2023 Annual Work Plan per their ordinance in its creation. So today, that is what I'm going to be presenting to you all, what the HRC has come up with for their first year. And so before we begin, I'm going to start with giving a little backstory for individuals who may not be aware of how the HRC came to be, as well as what has gone into the development of the work plan and what they have as the HRC has come up with as their priorities for this very first year. Again, this body has just been created. They've only been together for about a year now. So this is their very first work plan, their very first identification of the three or primary areas that they want to focus on for this very first year. And again, this process will probably be restarted towards the end of the year to create next year's work plan. So to give a little backstory, back in 2021, there was a 60-day charge by the mayor to create the HRC, what that would look like, what would the mission be, who would be on it. So the LRC took that and ran with it over the course of 5 meetings and came up with the composition and what specifically they wanted to see within this HRC development. So by November 2nd, 2001, the mayor and commission approved the adoption of the Human Relations Commission's ordinance. And then from November 2001 to about May, that member selection process ensued. And then by April of last year, the committee was actually formed and were notified of their selection. And then May 2022, they actually met for the very first time. And again, so if we're thinking of timelines, this happened literally this time last year. And these are the members that have been selected by the mayor and commission, appointed to the Human Relations Commission. As you can see, their terms are staggered intentionally. So as you can see, some of the members will be rolling off next year. But it was intentional to keep some individuals on and then be able to fill in those roles there. So during their time, since they've only been started since this time last year, a lot of the work that they have been doing in the beginning of their process was developing their stature as a BAC. They wanted to build that. So beginning in about November of last year, they started really analyzing ACC Gov and the inclusiveness and what can be done within the community, really thinking about what current issues are, where they see gaps, what are some strengths, what are some opportunities to develop there. From that analysis, they focused on 3 main areas. They really thought about, one, the non-discrimination ordinance, which is really the focal point of this body. So they wanted to focus on that. They also felt that community outreach and engagement, aligning themselves with the community, was something that was very important to do when you're talking about being a bridge for the community. They really wanted to focus on this. And then 3, they wanted to focus on policy. What specific areas should ACC Gov, should we be focusing on that would be for the betterment of the community? So those are the 3 main areas. So from that, they were able to develop the 3 main areas and what that actually looks like. So for the first focus area for this year, the HRC, their process of doing this was, as a main body, really splitting into 3 central subcommittees that will actually focus on these areas, and then bring back to the main body to present ideas as a collective group to be able to meet time frames that they have established. And as you will see, a lot of the time frames are for the end of this year, for December 2023. So within the first subcommittee, the unlawful discrimination or the non-discrimination ordinance, respectfully is that, they really wanted to focus on how this is viewed from the community standpoint. They wanted to see how accessible is it to find the unlawful discrimination ordinance, as well as how understandable is it to file a complaint, the processes and procedures. They really wanted to focus on that. Then the next area is, based on that audit, it's determining what can be done to improve that process. What from the community side is needed, and what can ACC Gov do to help improve that accessibility and understanding. And then as well as how can we better communicate what this ordinance is. What specifically does the community not understand about the ordinance, and how can we be more educational about the processes and procedures and why this is in place. So the next focus area is the community outreach and relationship building and listening. This was a focal point because as a new BAC and a BAC that is a bridge to the community about specific instances that are going on within the community that's really impact the livelihood of every resident, visitor, anybody that comes into, it's very important to establish that community presence. So what they have discovered is they want to build an action plan. How do we become that bridge? How does the HRC function as a bridge? And as a new BAC, that bridge isn't fully built. So they want to begin to build that bridge. So they also want to align themselves with the community as well. Because they are new at BAC, they want to establish a structure. They want for the community to understand who they are, what they do, and how they can help. So they're trying to develop that plan. So they're connecting with local businesses, community events that are going on, and trying just to establish themselves and get out for this first year. Then the third area is policy. So this is a little bit more hazy, as we all know, policy is very changing. If we're thinking about legislation that happens, we're not just thinking about what is happening in Athens-Clarke County, but really looking at what is happening in the world together. So this subcommittee really thought about what topics they want to really think about, because policy can be very widespread. So right now they are developing a plan to figure out how to identify those topic areas, how to prioritize them or categorize them, topics of interest, and then how to evaluate them. But they also don't want to box themselves in to just focus on current policies. They do want to leave room to be able to talk about the time-sensitive policies that come into place, legislation that happens that are more so urgent issues that they feel are very important to the community, that really have that impact on the community in such a short time frame. So they want to leave room for that. So right now, when it comes to policy, they're trying to identify those topic areas and create a plan there. And so they're thinking by the end of this year, they should have a plan or rubric that is developed by the end of this year to really think about what policies and how to actually evaluate or provide recommendations or focus. So just to recap, the HRC has determined that they wanted to focus on three main areas this year: community outreach, the NDO accessibility, and policy. So those are the three main areas that the HRC will be specifically working in intentionally this year. So what that looks like right now is the subcommittees meet once a month. Each of them have certain areas that they're trying to flesh out. So right now, the Community Outreach Subcommittee is planning for Juneteenth and Pride, trying to align themselves with community events right now, trying to really establish their brand as a new BAC. The NDO Subcommittee has already completed auditing the accessibility of the NDO, of the ordinance, and they're working currently through how to improve that visibility, what is needed, where it needs to be on the website, are there any other sites, how else to get this information out. And then again, the Recommendation Policy Subcommittee is working on developing that process to evaluate current or future recommendations. Trying to be more proactive within creating recommendations, as well as leaving that flexibility for those time-sensitive legislations that may come out to discuss, and hopefully make Athens-Clarke County be a little bit more proactive when it comes to these things and what can be done to help align ourselves with current policies or provide recommendations that would be more conducive to the community here for residents and visitors. Any questions?
Oh, my goodness.
I hope I did not speak through that.
Okay, I saw Commissioner Wright, Commissioner Link, and Commissioner Davenport.
I guess I don't have many questions at this time. Thank you for your concise summary and letting us know the good work that's happening there. I did want to reflect, this is probably more for the manager, but you might be able to answer as well. When we were working on this in LRC, one of the main things that we really learned and wanted to make sure happened was that outreach, was that ability to get out in the community and get the feedback, as well as to, like you were saying, educate. So budget-wise, where is that money that we would want this committee to have within her department to do the outreach plan? Or to do what they're saying?
If I understand, in the upcoming budget, where might y'all put money to help facilitate that? Is that the question?
Well, if it's not in there, yeah, would we earmark it in this budget?
So,
Go ahead.
yes, it would be, and y'all, and the reason I asked the clarifying question, because this is important, because we're kind of dealing with this, and you may even see an agenda item in the upcoming cycle, because the committee itself doesn't have any spending authority. So, yes, the funds, and I'm sorry I don't have that committed to memory. If they are there, they would be in the inclusion office budget. I would recommend if you put any more in there, it would be in the inclusion office budget. Staff can do the spending, working in tandem with the advisory committee on what they're trying to accomplish. I do applaud the commission for putting the work plan requirement in the ordinance. I think it's helpful for BAC to telegraph kind of what they're working on, so and there can be a back and forth, because ultimately you have to approve any advisory recommendations they make. That's more than you asked for, Commissioner Wright.
But that helps understand the proper place to make sure that it's not just talk and it's not just on paper. We can get to the action phase and the money can be there, maybe even because they're collecting information as well as educating back out. So they'll need it maybe already, but at least by July 1. We'll want to make sure that's in there.
And I want to applaud this group because and our staff, because and Nikki as well, because he's been helping to facilitate this, that, this is a very, I think, a deliberate approach to coming up with, interventions or initiatives that are going to be effective. And from what Dr. Epps has shared with me, they've created these subcommittees, and these subcommittees are kind of digging in on specific things that need to be done. And they might suggest a budget, associated with that. So we'll work together to see if there needs to be some placeholder funds perhaps in the upcoming budget that y'all can be let known about.
Thank you.
Commissioner Link?
Yeah, I'm wondering if this commission has had any discussion specific to how the non-discrimination ordinance pertains to other boards and commissions, particularly, folks who might have found their way onto one of those boards and commissions who might have engaged in public hate speech or, exhibited discriminatory behavior. Because from what I understand, we don't have very clear policy on how to, investigate or censure or remove those members who might have, acted contrary to these values that we've set forth in our local government.
Right. Did you do it?
Well,
Go ahead.
if you have an answer, please go ahead. But I would say that that process involves the filing of a formal complaint. So to answer your question, if there's any resident or citizen or visitor that someone suspects of being guilty of violating that ordinance, and there's a process that formal complaint has to be filed.
So does that ordinance include public hate speech or actual acts of discrimination, when it comes to a business or access or something like that?
I don't know if I can answer right now.
We appoint these people to represent our local government, and if they are, publicly engaging in speech or activities that is counter to the very values that we set forth in establishing something like this Human Relations Commission, we have no means of, investigating or removing those people.
I mean, if it doesn't matter if you're on a board authority commission, you're the manager, you're a commissioner, you're the mayor, if someone feels like you violated that, there's a process for them to do that, and then it's vetted, and if there's substance found there, then it proceeds further.
So what is the process for a BAC, though? I mean, I know we have a process within our employees.
It's just like anybody else.
Okay,
So-
so there is that process, and that wouldn't involve this commission. This commission would not be involved in. Attorney's office.
Yeah.
Right, so if you're asking if they're going to be investigating, to my knowledge, no, that's more so, it's routed through the attorney's office. But this BAC is more so within the subcommittee trying to make those procedures more knowledgeable for the community, for those questions of, well, how do I report, how do I do this? They want to make that procedure more widely known and educate the community, especially residents, visitors, students, whoever you may be, that there is a process that you can follow, and this is exactly how you do it. So that's exactly what, to your point, that they are trying to work on, to push that of, there is an option for you. There is a route that you can go. So trying to educate more on that. That's what they're trying
I mean,
to do.
I would just ask that, that education include, giving people a means to come forward about other BAC members, not just government employees, but those who are appointed to these non-paid volunteer positions.
Well, and the comment was just made, so there, and I appreciate the question, because there is not a code of conduct associated with boards, authorities, and commissions. And staff can only do so much. And as the appointees of a board, authority, and commission, if there are concerns about activities of the board itself, for instance, not following the guidelines the commission set for it, or individual actions, it's really up to the commission to help police that. Now, if there's an infraction against the law and we see it, we're going to say something. But if there's any concern about BAC behavior or conduct, we can, certainly there's a code of conduct for our employees. There may need to be one for BACs, and I think you're going to be taking up some of the BAC questions in committee, so that might be a good place to address it.
Commissioner Davenport?
Yeah, GOC's, one of its tasks is to review BACs. First, it's your first work session.
It is.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's very impressive. This group seems to be awesome. They're tackling and doing a lot. When it comes to public outreach, we are anticipating, or are they anticipating reaching out to PIO, social media, other events other than the two listed, and utilizing our website?
Yes, so we have started those conversations, and we've kind of advised the different routes that can be taken in the processes and procedures that go along with that, and just advise them on what other avenues there are, but it's ultimately up to them which route they want to take. But as of right now, I think a lot of the conversation has to do with the main focal points of where everyone is driven to is the website. So I think that's more so of where the conversation has been, but they are definitely open to other avenues, and that's part of the recommendations that they're thinking of what other sites may be more beneficial that reach the greater masses, other than the website. So they have thought about those things.
Thank you.
Commissioner who?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Dr. Epps, thanks for diving into this work.
Thank you.
I'm pretty excited about a lot of this. I do have a couple of questions. The first is the ordinance, among the many things it spelled out when we created this, talked about the mayor and commission getting quarterly reports, like quarterly updates from the HRC. Now that the structure is kind of in place, is that something that we can expect to begin seeing?
We can definitely do that, especially if that is within the ordinance and that's something that the mayor and commission want. We can definitely provide those quarterly updates, and we can work with the manager's office to provide those however you would like those.
I think a couple meetings ago, Commissioner Thornton had praised Athens Tutorial for giving us these awesome monthly reports. And I think, as I recall from the committee, we were imagining something similar, like a brief one-pager that just kind of lets us know, like, here's what's on track, here's what's in the works, here's what's done.
Yeah, that definitely won't be a problem. We can definitely do that.
Awesome. And then the other thing, I'm thinking about this, I guess it's called the Recommendation Policy Committee, which is a weird word order in my mind, but we'll stick with that for now because that's what it is. I guess I feel a little bit of concern about the timeline. I'm just thinking about how, they've been at it for about a year, and now we're talking about another almost a year before they develop this system for identifying and prioritizing policies. And I'm wondering if maybe they can begin to tackle some low-hanging fruit policies, kind of one at a time, ad hoc, while they develop that system. So we're not doing ad hoc forever, but one of the low-hanging fruit things in my mind is actually maybe we could take it off GOC's plate if they were willing to kick it over, is the inclusive facilities. I mean, what better body to look at how to have inclusive bathrooms, which I've talked to many members of that committee, seems like some obvious recommendations. Is there a way that, that subcommittee or this committee as a whole can begin to knock out some work before half of them lose their first term?
No, yes. So to clarify, while they're building this, they are talking about current policies and legislation that is occurring right now. So say, for instance, the subcommittee is getting ready to meet, I think, in another week or so. A lot of the members come to the meeting ready to talk about these policies. They're ready to talk about the legislation, but they also recognize in talking with that, in order to make a recommendation or evaluate that, they have to have some type of process, because they're having the general discussion, but they're trying to develop that process and be able to bring back to the main body to be able to give a better understanding of where they're trying to go to in order to make a more informed recommendation.
Awesome, thanks. Well, just a couple parting thoughts for colleagues here, maybe. The first section under purpose and scope says the Human Relations Commission shall provide policy recommendations, and it kind of enumerates that. So not that order is everything, but I kind of think of that as like a very high priority. It's listed first. And then under function and duties, it talks about how the Human Relations Commission shall respond to topics assigned by mayor and commission and make policy recommendations to the purpose and scope. Or that's actually related to HRC, but there's another section in there. Anyway, I know that the way these things can get kind of kicked around, the mayor assigned this to GOC before HRC really existed, but now that HRC does exist, I'm wondering if maybe colleagues would be interested in passing that along, just to give them something to tackle and take off our plate while they work on the more strategic approach. Thanks.
Well, we began discussion on inclusive facilities at our March meeting. So we have a meeting Monday, and we'll be, be kind of, I don't think it'd be a good idea to kick it to another team where we already started, or another committee.
Commissioner Myers.
Yes, thank you as well. And I guess the answer to my question might come in these quarterly reports, but I was wondering what kind of policy topics the HRC actually was, talking about. Not that they're definitely going to go there, but just to give us an idea of what people are thinking about.
Well, it just really depends. It just depends on what the current society topic is at the moment. Right now, we have a lot of discussion going on in society about gender reaffirming surgeries. So really looking in, I've heard some members talking about that, but that discussion has not come up yet. Mm-hmm. But they're really leaving that flexibility for the current topic, hot topic within society at the current moment. So that would be an example of a possible area. And that could possibly change, within the next week or two. Another legislation might come out, or something within news might come out that is just, we need to jump on this, we need to do this, or someone within the HRC believes that this is something that is a passion for them, or they really want to focus on this, and that's just how they decide that what is going to come up at the moment, But that's the general area. But as far as like identifying those topics, that's what they're trying to figure out now what areas of focus they really want to do, because it can be so widespread.
So those subcommittees are each meeting once a month? Are they meeting as a whole group once a month as well?
So yes, so the subcommittees are meeting separately from the main body meeting. So they're able to report back at the main body meeting. So they're scheduled out about either 2 weeks from or after the main body meeting, and then they're able to provide updates to guide that discussion at the main body.
Great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Commissioner Fisher?
And I think to Commissioner Who's point about the timeline, I think since Dr. Epps just got started, probably need to serve a little bit of patience, because initially they didn't have anybody guiding them. Now that she's in place, she can help them sort of guide them and get the information that we need to have as commissioners. But I think we should have a little bit patience about this and where we're going. I think December 2023 is a good timeline to have those things in place. So I think from us, from the commission, be a little bit patient and continue to get her feet wet, and because she's just out hitting the ground running. So I just want to express that. Okay.
I don't know what the word patient means. I don't know what the word patient means.
No, you don't.
Sorry, I'm just joking. I'm joking.
No, you're not. No, you're not.
It's a good pun.
I have a question, and I think it's for the manager, though. In the last year's budget, we allocated through the Black Lives Matter resolution on Juneteenth. We allocated, it was either $10,000 or how much? $20,000. And I noticed that they are tackling, they're direct. Where is it? Is it $20,000 going to be?
Yeah, so the 20,000 is in the leisure services budget currently. So there's a couple other recommendations coming to you in this next agenda cycle. And one of those is the flag designation for the first half of the month for Pride and the second half of the month for Juneteenth. And then, of course, this annual work plan. My understanding is that that the committee has talked about and voted on recommendations on Juneteenth, which I believe, Dr. Epps, includes an event at the Morton Theater as well as partnering with the Hot Corner Festival. Because as you can see from the timeline, they are kind of hitting their stride now, and to try and create something new rather than partner with something existing, could be problematic with less than 60 days. So that's the recommendation from the committee right now. And did I misspeak, Dr. Epps?
No, so that is the recommendation right now as far as Juneteenth. They are trying to work within the work plan to align themselves with the events. Yes, there is $20,000 that is allocated, which right now sits within the leisure services budget, and that money is specifically for Juneteenth activities. But there is flexibility that we're currently working through to think of some other ways to celebrate Juneteenth as well.
Commissioner Fisher?
Yeah, just for FYI to the manager, while you was on vacation, Sister Manager Nikki Jones and I talked, and I don't think that Juneteenth and the Hot Corner needs to be together. Those are two separate events. Hot Corner represents something totally different, and Juneteenth is totally different. So my recommendation is not for them to do that together. And Juneteenth have their own event, Hot Corner have their own event. So that's sort of, so we're trying to work through that. So we have had some conversations, but I would not support that both of them do it together. It needs to be a separate event because it's separate, and I don't want to give a history lesson about Hot Corner and Juneteenth, but it's two separate events. It should not be combined together.
Okay.
Could you clarify that? Is there discussion because of that? Last year, there were two separate events. So is there, could you just, could someone give me an update on that?
Well, because it's, mid-April and June is, 45, 60 days away from the event. I think, I wasn't there, but I feel like the committee didn't feel like there was time to adequately create an event. And so I think the reason was, well, let's partner with something existing and try and make it a value-added
Right. So what has happened with the planning of Juneteenth is the HRC has decided to partner with the Hot Corner Festival to celebrate Juneteenth. Now, I do understand the implications of doing that, as they are two separate events. Now, the reasoning behind that was because of wanting to be able to create an equitable and fair process of creating an event or partnering with the current Juneteenth event. So that's what was there. But we are looking into some other alternatives to see if the possibility of doing a specific Juneteenth event is available. So we are working on some other plans to present, but as far as the HRC, they have voted on to do, to collaborate with the Hot Corner Festival with the intent of purposely celebrating Juneteenth during the festival, tabling, passing out information regarding the HRC and Juneteenth, as well as holding an educational event about Juneteenth at the Morton. And then staff, we are also looking into the possibility and the timeliness of potentially holding another event that's specifically for Juneteenth. Looking into that.
So let me say this. I get that, but understand in this community though, Hot Corner is a separate event celebrating Hot Corner Morton Theater, where black businesses during the 30s and 40s was a thriving enterprise there. So it shouldn't be confused that we're gonna put Juneteenth in there. So I make that real clear. And and again, I'm not throwing at you, but I think we need to understand, our community needs to understand it's two different events. Hot Corner they've been doing this for over 20 plus years. We just started doing Juneteenth 3 or 4 years ago. So and for us to put it together, and I'm putting it out there. It was a bad suggestion that went to the HRC. It should have never been suggested. I thought that was intentional. So we need to make sure that when we're gonna move forward and do it the right way, it needs to be two separate events.
Commissioner Houle?
Well, can we address that?
Oh, just one moment, Commissioner. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Fisher, I know we talked about this, and so I think Hot Corner, we're just going to have a presence there, right? Just like we would have a presence at Pride Festival for the HRC. I say we, it's the HRC. An understanding that Juneteenth is a separate event, so we are looking into it. You know where we are. But at the end of the day, if we're going to have a Juneteenth event, there's a process, especially if someone wants to partner with us.
Right, I understand.
There's a process that we're going to have to go through. And to Manager Williams' point, it's a very limited time frame. But that being said, we'll do the best we can, and I think we'll be successful.
Commissioner?
Yes, I respect my colleague who's sharing the GOC's views on this. I want to be deferent to Commissioner Davenport and the other members of GOC regarding the inclusive facilities assignment. But I would ask if there isn't going to be sort of a passing of the ball, that at least, the HRC members be consulted at some point in the process of the development of this policy, because to me it just seems so clearly aligned, and we've got these people who have been, we had a massive number of applicants to this board, and then we selected, a number of people to serve with this kind of work in mind, and I feel like they can lend some solid expertise and opinion to the work of that particular assignment. So, thanks.
Any other thoughts? No, because I need to make a comment here. I do appreciate your presentation, and I will be the one that will identify the elephant in the room. The concern, I believe, about Juneteenth comes around Rolling Ridge event, which is totally different from Hot Corner. So if, and I believe that Assistant Manager Jones is working on that, but that is the crux of, are we still going to be doing something Juneteenth-wise in Rolling Ridge or in any other community?
So,
Can I respond to that?
Who's going to respond to it?
If it's okay, I want to respond to that.
Yes, sir.
So, in our conversation, yes, Rolling Ridge did something, but if the city is gonna do it, we would need to do it on city property. Because we can't sponsor the event in Rolling Ridge and pay for it, and at least legally, from my understanding. So, still want to do the event, but I think we have to do it at another location that's possibly owned by Athens-Clarke County in order to get this done.
Okay.
AKA Holland Park, possible to do a Juneteenth event.
Okay.
And if I'm wrong, Assistant Manager Jones, let me know.
Well, the question related to Rolling Ridge, and that's specifically a group that's had events there in the past. You know, last year we had Juneteenth at Holland Park, and that was with a group called the Juneteenth Collective, a group that's hasn't been formally recognized. So what we wanted to do this year is, if we're going to enter into some sort of contract or work with another group to hold a Juneteenth event, we think we need to go through a process. So, you know, we couldn't say that, hey, we're just going to do it with Rolling Ridge. We're going to go through a process, and that's why I'm saying I don't know if we have enough time. So we have to put out a quick solicitation to see if someone wants to do this, and they have to have all the insurance requirements to be able to partner with us at Holland Park. But that might happen. So, you know, that's part of the crux of why it was easier to partner with an existing event opposed to creating a brand new event.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, initially, yeah. But again, like I said, I think one of the things I talked with Assistant Manager Jones about was last year when we done, there probably should have been a debrief after the event was done, so we talked some things out. And then to me, and again, I'm just one commissioner, once I got information, I felt like that it was intentionally done in order to say, okay, we're gonna put it with hot corner, but we had time to get this together in order to have the event, and now we know like we scrambling because you're right, you know, June will be here before we know it. But again, that's neither here nor there. But I just think we need to understand as a community what hot corner means and what Juneteenth means. And we don't need to get the two confused. Okay. And people will get, well, why y'all doing Juneteenth with hot corner? Because that's gonna be the talk in the black community. I'm just gonna put it like that.
Okay.
All right. We're going to convey your concerns to the HRC.
Right, okay, fine. And I'm aware of
I
that.
mean, we're going to continue to work on what Nikki, but, you know, this isn't a staff commission thing, okay?
No,
I know.
We just needed to say what was really going on. So with that, and all hearts are clear, like they say in the Baptist church, we out of here.
Move to adjourn.
Second. Do we have to adjourn on work sessions?
No.
We don't have to adjourn on, wait a minute.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, let's make a motion to adjourn.
First, second. To adjourn. Second.
All in favor? Aye. All right.
Since we started making notes on every meeting.